everybody. We are in the Community Development Standing Committee meeting for Tuesday, October 3rd. We're meeting today on the traditional territory of Squamish Nation. So the first item on the agenda is adoption of the agenda. Do I have a mover for adoption of the agenda? Moved by Councillor Pryor, seconded by Councillor Chappelle. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the minutes from our previous meeting on September 12th. Are there any errors or omissions in the minutes? All right, seeing none, I'll take a mover for adoption of the minutes. Moved by Mayor Heisman, seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, moving along to item number 4.1. We have a delegation, and I'd like to invite Mr. Chima to come on and sit up at the table and say welcome back. And as you can see, we've got a pretty tight agenda today, and so we have 10 minutes for this item. So definitely encourage you to focus on any new information that's come forward and sort of the key points that you'd like to raise. So I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. It's a couple of things new came up, and I just want to explain to the council. We applied for the removal of the 595 ton, the policy from their reason was we done it because I don't want council thinking mid of OCP why I done it that. We had a policy, insurance policy. I have to keep them happy. I have to give them the update in 6 months. So my 6 month with the policy was due, and OCP was getting slower, so that's why we spent money to apply to show to the people who we bought the policy and we're moving forward with the project, to the right direction, because they giving me deadline 6 months. I have to update them, so the OCP was, we thought it was going to be pretty close what's going to happen, and so then I got no other way to do it, so that's why we applied for the removal of the OCP for the threshold to the city of Squamish, and that's what there's my thinking to come today to explain council. I don't want council thinking what's going on between the OCP, and I'm mid of the OCP. I'm doing this policy here. So the reason was we applied to spend the money. I knew that I had to spend the money to please the people I bought the policy, because they gave me deadline to 6 months. This 1 year the policy going to end the next year in February. So to make it short, that's the reason we apply, and given them here we apply, and we're moving forward to not disturb the community to do anything. Whenever I come and people think I'm threatening or closing the trail, like I got a situation sitting in my head for the last couple of years. We are trying to police the community and police the biking community and the trails and everything, and there's a time come now, we're working with a pretty tight schedule, and I want to make sure, tell the council like what's our deadline, and what's, like, whenever I say something, then there's the media or people think I'm threatening to do something. I got a reason to I don't have the policy. I'm not somebody going to cover our company to the liability that we have to do certain things. I don't know what other word I can use it to say, hey, I have to do something. We had a meeting with Doug and with biking community a couple of months ago. The situation that time was, back and forth, and some people think I'm threatening. That's not the threatening. We have to apply with the rules to the people to cover ourselves too. So I just want to make sure, tell the council that was the reason we apply, and give them the update to my people who we bought the policy. And I want to make sure, tell the council clearly, that policy end in the end of February next year. So we has to do something. Like, I'm not saying it's A or B, whatever this is going to be, we have to come to some conclusion what's going to happen. Then I can move on, and the biking community can move on, because next summer we don't want to be dealing with this issue last minute, and they got big things to do, and they have to rearrange their routes and all that, and we want to see where we can be in by February. We're going to be somewhere close, or where we can be dealt with this, where I can have my policy renewed again and saying it, hey, this is happening or not happening. So that's, you know, this one is very clear. If anybody have a question, anything, I'm willing to answer.
So if I can just summarize and tell me if I got sort of the gist of it, but what I'm hearing is that in terms of your insurance policy on the lands that you own, your insurer is only willing to extend the policy until February?
It is the last time they said they're gonna give us the policy because we are trying to buy them like under the rules. And the last time they said this is the last time we ever gonna do it. You know, you go get it from somewhere else, or then we're out.
Right, and then so the corollary to that is that if you're no longer able to renew that policy, then there's no bike race that could happen.
Yeah, I don't know what other word I can use, you know, that I tell people, you know, that nobody can enter, then people think I'm threatening, like, I don't know what other word I can use to the community, say, you know, I don't know what better word I can say to the community or people or council, you know, I got no choice.
Okay, I have a question from Councillor Chappelle.
Yeah, so what I don't understand is that if you allow permission for bikes to be on your property, you need your own separate policy. Could SORCA have their own policy?
I need separate policy.
You need a separate policy,
Yeah.
and you can't get a
No.
renewal on it as long as you are giving permission.
Yes, you know, that we're trying to this, working, that's why I spend the money now to please them, to apply in the city, show them. They said you're 6 months up, we have a stop date, then I came quickly here and apply for it and spend the money on the application. I know that money is gonna be, you know, going in the drain because of the OCP, but I got no choice to spend the money, or I just, you know, do something else. Like I said, well, can I do it? Then they're gonna say maybe, Bob, you're not moving fast now, or you're not, nothing happening, we're just gonna tell you we're not gonna do it. So this, I'm trying to please them and please the community, and I don't know other, better way I can say.
Okay. Mayor Heitzman, Councillor Frank?
Yeah, I'm a little confused about if this is insurance to simply allow a bike race or bike races to happen on your property, or is this some other type of insurance?
It's generally public cannot access, because right now, that's not only biking we're talking about. Right now, every day the trail get used,
Yeah.
daily basis.
Yeah.
So that, I'm not talking about biking only, I'm talking about even
Generally,
putting,
okay.
generally overhaul everything.
Okay. And then just maybe through the chair to Gary, can you just, you know, the OCP I think has gone on longer than we all hoped, but what is the current timeline for a final draft of the OCP?
But it's later on through the chair. It's later on in the agenda is the timeline. We plan on, is it December?
Yeah, we plan on proposing a meeting in December and then wrapping it up by February. So public hearings in January and then hopefully moving to adoption in early February.
Councillor Craig?
So what's happening at this adoption? What are you bringing in?
So this would be the new OCP, adoption of the new OCP. Right now, the timelines look like February would be the adoption date.
So did we pick 1, 2, or 3 when we were looking at bringing lands in for the OCP? I mean, I remember we discussed it. I don't know if our pick was, like, are these particular lands slated for some movement in development in the OCP?
So we're currently drafting the policy as a result of that last discussion we had with council, and we'll be bringing that forward in December.
So,
For the
Mr.
first
Chief,
meeting.
I understand, I mean, you want to get something moving forward, and I know as long as I've been in council, you have been in here working on this probably,
Yes.
and, you know, years before that as well. So, I mean, I understand that. Are we as a council close to making a decision?
We are,
Go ahead.
sorry, I didn't mean to preempt the conversation that was going to happen on later. I just wanted to, at this point, talk about a timeline so that everyone's clear about what our goals are in terms of getting a final draft and hopefully adopting it within January, February of the new year. So that's, there's a whole other conversation in the agenda down below. sorry. I didn't mean for it to.
Councillor Race and then Councillor Kent.
Thank you. I think there are other solutions. I mean, it's not clear to me, frankly, what difference to an insurance policy it would make if threshold was there or not there, and how that might impact liability on the property. I know from being part of the organizing committee for the triathlon for years, you can get policies, the event organizers can get policies for the event day, which cover also the landowners, because we used to get them with the district and the school board and so forth named as lost days. The general day of somebody that's walking along the property today, I'm not an expert on liabilities of that nature, and I know the legislation changed since I've been stopped practicing, but you can seek your own legal counsel on that. I was under the impression that it was not as onerous for the landowner for somebody that just goes on the property without permission. So, however, that being said, we'll get to our OCP when we get to it, and we'll do it.
I'm gonna, we took a legal opinion from people and different people, insurance policy. Even today's, I'm bending over, like our legal opinions, they said you shouldn't do that. That's for general public, but I'm just closing my eyes and working with the community. Even if you talk about legal right now, my lawyer said you shouldn't, it should be signs there. There shouldn't be people who will be crossing on a private property. That's the legal opinion. If you want, I can bring in that legal opinion in closed meeting if council want to see it.
Okay, we have Councillor Kent.
And your due date, you said, was February?
End of February, the
End of
policy.
February.
Yeah. Because the reason is, there's a question you were saying, the threshold. We was telling those people, the insurance policy, we are moving, the threshold's gonna get moved, the trail's gonna be transferred over to the public using area, transfer over to the city, and all that is gonna be all dealt with it. That's the reason, so.
Just wondering if staff might have a comment on sort of, if it were to go through in terms of turning over certain areas for public use and whatnot, what kind of timeline that would look like in a development of this scale, and sort of, just generally speaking, what's a realistic, given past experience?
If I may, to do a sub-area plan, which would be a requirement, likely in this case, it would take at least a year or more to go through the planning process to get to a sub-area plan.
Councillor Race?
Yeah, and I don't want to start giving legal advice, but I think there are solutions to a liability problem. And for example, the landowner, if it was so inclined, could grant the district a blanket right-of-way over the property for public access. So now it's our responsibility. Landowners typically do that as part of the zoning negotiation, and it may be imposed as part of the zoning negotiation, but it could happen today. And that would, I think, absolve the landowner from issues and make the district responsible, just like we are for any other public lands. And those types of things are quite specific about when they're retracted and when the development happens, and we discharge it from the lands that are actually going to be developed. So there are solutions like that if there is a will to do that. It does not just require rezoning.
I have Councillor Pryor and then Mayor Hanson.
I know insurance is an issue. I mean, my read on this is the development is the issue of the property owners. They want to move this forward. And I'm sure it costs X amount of money to have people riding their bikes around, and it costs a lot less in insurance to not have their bikes around. And yes, the district can say, okay, we'll take over the insurance. But I think the topic we have today is, when is this property going to be up for moving forward? And that's what this conversation is. When are we moving forward?
It's not what this conversation is.
I mean, that's what it sounds like to me. And if not, the property owner is not going to insure the property anymore, because because it's too expensive, and why would they if they're not getting anyone here playing ball with them?
Your Height.
Thank you. Wondering if we could just talk to our insurer, MIABC, about what some options may be in order to protect, obviously, Mr. Chima or anybody else whose lands people walk through. They obviously wouldn't insure stuff unless we were involved, but they might be able to give us some guidance on how we can make sure everyone's protected from that standpoint.
Yeah, and I concur with that. That's probably something we should be aware of, given the nature of our community, see what other options there are. Mr. Chima, any final words?
I want to speak to the Doug's saying that give it the right of way. Why should we give the right of way to the city? Any reason, like this doesn't make sense to do that. You know, this is private land, and it doesn't even exist to transfer something land to the city. It doesn't even make sense to me. You know, I mean, what angle he's using it to transfer the land to the city.
Well, from
It's not even.
yeah, no, I think from my understanding of the way the conversation thread has gone is that it's a solution to alleviate the immediate concern around liability. But of course, you are as the private landowner, you're entitled to use the property in the way that
But
you see fit.
you blank give the right of way 30 feet to the city. How are you gonna say those people not gonna cross beyond 30 feet? This doesn't make sense. Like you don't have a fence around, so it doesn't work. Like I tried everything for the last 2-3 years. That's why I went to spend the money even to apply to police everybody, not to disturb anybody, council or the community, because this is pretty much driven by the community. The community's behind, biking community behind the project. Everybody want to work together. Just the matter of this, the timing to how we can make it everybody happy. I think so.
Okay. So, you want to comment? Okay, so I have Councillor Chappelle.
Thanks. I'm having trouble separating the fact that, applying for an OCP amendment makes no difference to the insurance or the access of bikers. So those are two separate issues to me. This issue of insurance and allowing bikers on private property is everybody's issue. It's not just your issue. It's allowing, we have bikers and hikers on private land throughout our community. So in general, I think insurance will be an outstanding issue, and it is something that we have to look at resolving, either if it's liability as you go through the process of amending the OCP, it'll still be the issue of bikers going on private land. So even if you get an OCP amendment, the issue is exactly the same, the insurance issues are the same. So having a resolution for our entire community is a really important thing, is how are we going to allow bikers and private interests to coexist with liability issues that are having to be paid for by one company or another. So I'd be interested to see the policies that are laid out. The policy doesn't change whether you get an OCP amendment or not, right? So we need to resolve the fact that you're allowing bikers on private land, and that's your choice. And it's in our best interest to provide insurance, or SORCA, or the other groups, but it's also trail running groups. And so how do we make it so that sports can be accessed on private lands is a big question. And I'm not sure if staff have examined any of the possibilities as far as third-party insurance or...
Okay. Councillor Pryor?
Yes. I think my interpretation of the conversation here is not about insurance. Insurance is an aspect of the conversation. And I know 15 years ago when I was the president of the Trail Society, the district did all sorts of research on people using trails on private property. The issue is the property owner wants to move forward, and he's saying that come November, or whatever date it is, the insurance is going to run out there. And whether we want to insure it or not will not affect
Yes.
the outcome of that. There'll be no use in the property. And it's not a threat, it's just numbers where he pays for insurance, it's more expensive than that.
So if I understood correctly, the sort of where we stand right now in this conversation is that staff is prepared to look in to see if there are other options that could alleviate the liability issue in the short term, recognizing that, you know, even if an OCP amendment was successful, that sub-area planning would have to take place over a period of a year and, you know, a little bit of an extended timeline. So I think that the outcome of this discussion is that we're gonna have staff take a look at that and be back in contact with council in a reasonable time frame to assess what those options are and put them forward to the applicant to see if there is any options on that. And so with that, final comment, Mr. Chima, we're already double the time for this item.
I want to answer to Susan. She
Yeah.
said, what's the difference? I'm going to explain to, she said, you know, the policy and the moving the OCP. The difference, they said, if you're moving forward, we will continue your policy. If I'm
We
not,
can stop there,
yeah,
that's good.
yeah. So if I continue, there's something happening, they said, okay, we will work with you. If it's not happening something, no. That's the difference. You know, you want to know the difference. That's the difference. And I don't want to, like, why I came from, I don't want to come in January, say, council, this is happening. I want to give the biking community enough time, they can do something else. If we cannot work together or this is not going to happen, that's okay. But let everybody know that's not going to happen, then everybody know, they knows what to do and we can move forward that way. It does not look like a threat last minute, they got timing for June, July races, then this look like a threat. You know, because that's what the people last time used it, because I don't know what other word I can say to people. You know what I'm saying? So they all working together, and we are very wonderful for the last 10, 15 years we work together. We, you know, they're growing every years. Their numbers, you know, you seen them. Jeff is here, and they're moving forward. And we don't want to make any surprise till the last minute. You know, so that's, if we're moving forward with the project and something can happen to the OCP showing this is going to get developed, yes, they will continue my policy. They've seen this is moving, this is going to get developed, this is going to happen next year, something else is going to move into that direction. If not moving to that direction, then we said, this is over. And that's where we want to be very clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, did I miss the business arising? Did we ask for business arising?
Oh, you know what, I skipped right over that.
Okay.
We can go back.
I can do it at the round table too, you know,
Okay.
whatever your
Let's
preference.
do that around too.
Okay.
All right, moving on to 5.1, development projects updates. We have our big spreadsheets in front of us.
Yes.
And, you know, usually we just kind of do these in a general Q&A from council, but is there anything that staff wants to highlight at the outset?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we do have 4 new applications since the last meeting, 2 development permits and 2 rezonings. The new applications we're highlighting now in green, and then we're putting 3 stars on items that we'd like to raise discussion around. So as you can see, there's 3 fairly large applications. The first one on Government Road is the first development permit application in mixed-use District 1 zone. It's for a 4 to 6 unit residential unit building and substantial employment space underneath. So that will be coming to council likely soon. We also have the seniors center and the Polygon proposal to move it downtown, the seniors housing complex on 3rd Avenue. So this is a rezoning for Polygon for the existing seniors housing site, and a development permit for where the seniors housing would be relocated. So approximately 230 units proposed for the seniors housing, and Polygon in their rezoning are proposing 170 units or 75 for the current seniors housing site. And finally, we have a rezoning application on the boulevard. It's right at the intersection of the boulevard and Skyline. I'm just gonna try and shoot over there. The rezoning is for RS3 lots, so there's a house right now on the property, and the proposal would be to subdivide it into 3 small lots. There is a house currently on the lot, and the way the lot lines would fall, that house would have to be removed. What we have had a little bit of discussion with the applicant is potential for this site to be something else than RS3. We have a severe lack of any neighborhood commercial in the Highlands. And so before we go down that road in further discussions, we wanted to check in with council. What we would suggest is maybe a small mixed-use building with 4 or 5 apartments and neighborhood commercial component down below, sort of like what we've got in Valley Cliff in the commercial node area. It's a fairly small site, it's about 10,000 square feet, but by our estimate, it could accommodate a 4,000 square foot building footprint over a couple of stories with parking.
Okay, so I have Councillor Pryor, Councillor Race, Elliott, and Chappelle.
Thanks. Yeah, that's interesting. I've been looking at corners up there for this very use for about 20 years. Can you just zoom out there and just get where this one is, please? Would it be, one more time,
Yes, I'm just gonna.
would it be, yeah, that's good. Would it be an exercise that,
Skyline on the boulevard.
would it be an exercise that council might be interested in doing, is looking at potential commercial sites to stop people from having to drive all the way down the bottom of the hill and possibly look at maybe rezoning a couple? Because right at the top of the cut, there's a house there, and there's actually 2 houses there would make really, really good spot for a little corner store. And there might be others, but just like you say, you look at this and someone wants to turn it into a 2 or 3 lot subdivision. There's so much density up there now that when I used to build houses up there, I had to drive down that hill to get stuff at the store all the time. I would never live up there. Up and down the hill.
Staff care comment on that?
Yes, the way to do that would be to go for a neighborhood planning process for the Highlands, which we will be proposing in the next maybe 5 years. All of our communities are in need of sub-area planning, and the Highlands is, we see Highlands as being in a bit of a less need because there's so much development there already. There's not a lot of, other than infill here and there, there's not a lot of potential. If you compare it to the Estates or the Centennial Way area, those are more priority for sub-area planning. So yes, the ideal way would be to go for a sub-area plan, identify those locations. But I think there's an opportunity on this lot because it is quite central and it wouldn't interfere with the traffic that's going around the boulevard just to the east here. So it's actually a pretty central location for some neighborhood commercial.
The one I was looking at was pretty much 2 up. It was on the cut there. Any one of those corners, there, one there, yeah, the double one in that corner there.
Yes, other than from a traffic perspective, it's quite a busy location.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, I think interesting. I don't know if that's the best one for
Councillor Race.
Thank you. Yeah, it is interesting. And 2 comments. One is, and you might not know this, but there was a proposal, probably 15, 20 years ago, to put a neighborhood commercial in at the time that the second part of Glacier View was going in. And there was a public meeting held by the developer, and the public was wholeheartedly opposed to that. So there is turnover, of course, but you might end up with, obviously there'd be community consultation in this.
Yes.
I'll just give you that little piece of history. The second thing is, when I saw this, the other thing that occurred to me is throughout the Highlands, there's a variety of different restricted covenants or building schemes, they're now called. And it's kind of a patchwork because different places were developed at different times and sometimes by different developers. And so they're all kind of the same, they're not necessarily a standard one, but some of them, particularly some of the older ones, and this is one of the older ones, older areas, had prohibitions on subdivision. And also limits on the type of use. And so if you were even thinking about subdividing into 3 small lots, it might offend the building scheme, or if you were thinking of adding commercial, that also might offend the building scheme. So building schemes, and I ended up going through a few of these things when I was in practice. Building schemes are not binding on the municipality, of course. We can zone it as we see fit. The difficulty is that when the zoning and the building scheme don't align, I think you have potential for neighborhood conflict. Because somebody thinks they're complying with the zoning, but they're offside with the building scheme. And so the neighbors can actually sue them to stop them. So as a matter of general policy, I think we would want to be as far as possible aligned with the building schemes. And so my comment would be, is there any restriction on title that might prevent what is proposed here? Otherwise, one way or the other, I think it would be a matter of community consultation.
Councillor Elliott.
I know as part of the OCP engagement, we asked people in the Highlands where they thought their commercial nodes should go, and do we have that? Have we compared this location to that data?
I wonder if Matt can answer that.
Yeah, so there, to the chair, in the OCP engagement on that issue, I would say that we didn't get a ton of people giving input. I think maybe conceptually it was hard for people to go, let's change these houses to commercial. So we didn't really get much. Where on our OCP we have identified a location for a future commercial node is in the Thunderbird development at the bottom of Pia. It was one of the areas that's potentially considered in that sub-area plan. And also at the Quest University. There's an area of potential commercial development in that space. So those are the two that have been identified in the OCP as future neighborhood nodes. But we didn't get a lot of people in the community identifying locations within the existing build-out area.
Yeah. I think this location is interesting. I'm just excited that someone's contemplating just a higher density up there, even with turning it to RS3. But yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing a mixed use somewhere then. But I think the community will have a lot to say about both proposals.
All right, Councillor Patel and then Mayor Heisman.
Thanks, and I didn't have, I agree with all the points, I wouldn't mind seeing the commercial up there, but I'd be interested to see if there has been a lot of public turnover, as Councilor Ray said. I'm more interested in the Third Avenue applications. One is dependent on the other, is that correct?
That is correct.
So the rezoning of the 6-story apartment building is going to remove, that is not specific seniors housing and it's zoned senior housing, so it would be moving to just regular condominium apartment buildings in trade for the senior center agreement.
That is our understanding of the proposal right now. It's just all market housing on that other site.
With no units set aside, just
At this time, we have not received a CAC proposal. That's something that we're still looking at. We need to clarify how the two offset each other, or what's the relationship in terms of amenities
yeah,
or amenity contributions.
that's what I'll be looking for, is see the complementary uses between the two and how it actually fits into the neighborhood and is beneficial to everybody as opposed to getting one project, although I think it's a really innovative way to do things. But that's put a lot of units to put in the market without having any amenities whatsoever, so.
And just to add on that, while we're speaking specifically on that, on the Third Avenue, I'm wondering if this is a very unprecedented type of project. I do wonder, are we considering the value of the land that we're forfeiting as a result of the project? I think that's something that is probably relevant to the conversation, given the fact that this is public land in this case. Is it? I'm seeing some shaking heads. Who owns the land?
The land is owned by the Seniors Society, and the Senior Society are the part of the application, and they're fully behind the application. But they currently own both of those properties.
And do we know who owned the property prior to the Senior Society?
We can look into that. We're just not that far down in the,
Yeah,
in the
that'd be
application.
helpful information.
It was part of the Whole Saltaire development and it was part of their, by we can get confirmation.
No, and I'm specifically referring to where the current seniors, the ones that will be
Okay.
demolished, what that property, where that came from. Sorry, I have Mayor Heinzman on the list before I jumped in. Councilor Pryor.
Yeah, just while we're on the Third Avenue one, agree generally, we need to understand the whole scope of both of them all together. I think we have had a bit of a presentation on the first one. I think this is of the magnitude that we should bring it back to a CDC meeting to understand them both together and all the aspects of that, so.
Okay.
To the chair. Just quickly on the Boulevard one, I too would love to see a neighborhood commercial up there. Do I have it? The landowner wants to do RS3, and we've sort of said, "Hey, maybe this is a good idea." Is the landowner interested in that, or are they just like, "I don't want that"?
They, as I understand, they are interested, and we will be having a meeting soon to further discuss that, but we wanted to check in with council, make sure we're not going in the wrong direction in those discussions.
Yeah, I would suggest early in those discussions, like very early, there'd be some community consultation to get an understanding from the neighbors about, is this the right location? Is this something that people are interested in? Parking will come up, as you can imagine. So, yeah, so I think just very early on, I wouldn't want these guys to go down this road so far that, without doing that consultation early on.
Councilor Pryor, and then I have Councilor Kent.
Well, just on the Third Avenue one, I appreciate your request for the information on who owned those lots previously. That's a good question. And then on this one here up in the Highlands, I still think it would be a good idea if staff would bring back a few corners that they thought would be good. And Patty's idea there to get the neighbors' input early, because sometimes neighbors might not, they might really balk at this. But I do think it's time to have an area up there.
All right. Councilor Kent.
Can you just slide back to the 39666 government, the first one?
Yes.
Can you just give us a quick Coles notes on what they propose as far as floor space for the commercial and office?
I do not have the commercial space information yet. Again, it's a recent application, so we haven't populated our system yet. But it is directly tied to residential floor area. So the more commercial you do, the more residential you do. So it is substantial.
Thank you.
And it complies completely with the mud one.
Yes.
Okay, Councilor Schell and then Councilor Reese.
Thanks. I'm going to express this early, that when you only have 2 lots in town that are zoned for seniors housing, you're losing, unless it's a specific seniors. I know over 55 units are difficult to do, but when you rezone for mass density, it's really easy to get short-sighted about getting a new project that they absolutely need in trade for this other project. And I know they're excited about it, but when you look at long-term losing your land for seniors housing, I worry about the proposal. I'm concerned about the massive density that's being added is going to be accessible, but is not going to be set aside for seniors and will be quickly taken up by the market. So, and then we have no more land for seniors.
All right, Councilor Reese.
Yeah, interesting. It will be interesting to see. The Cedars has been around, which is what the area we're talking about. It's been around probably in excess of 40 years. I don't know when it actually was built. Early 70s, I would think. But you can go back in the land title records and find out who it was. Going back to the mud application, it was just kind of struck me. So that's 5 floors above grade, but it seems to contemplate underground parking. Is that possible in that area?
It is possible because the grades have to come up because of the flood construction level in that area. So the parking itself might not go too far down under the current grade, but the site will have to come up to the FCL.
So it's more or less 6 floors above existing grade.
Probably a little less, but close to it, yes.
All right, any other comments, questions on development?
Oh, yeah, I do.
Oh, go ahead.
And it wasn't one of the ones you mentioned, I just have to find it. The Quest University one, third from the bottom on the first page. I was just curious, is that Quest University lands, or is that some of the development lands around Quest University that we're talking about?
I believe those are Quest University. No, there's a
Oh,
different one.
no, sorry, through the chair, that's actually a block subdivision of the land to the north of the existing campus. 3 large blocks,
Owned by the-
yes,
Owned by who?
the university.
Owned by the
Sorry, it's the university.
I was just curious. Thank you.
Are we gonna do this one?
Oh, apologies, the Scott Crescent application is coming to council soon, and it's a rezoning. We have had a little bit of an issue on the commercial space, the employment space on that proposal, but we have since resolved it since this list was put together, so there's nothing that we need council's input before the bylaw readings. The backstory is that the current zone has a maximum commercial space, and what we proposed was to do that as a minimum for commercial space, and we have agreement from the applicants to do that.
Councillor Elliott.
Does the rest of this development include market rental and affordable housing?
It doesn't.
And as part of this rezoning, can we make that a condition of rezoning?
Well, council could. The actual rezoning only adds, I think, 30 units to the proposal. So what we would be recommending was that we take the CAC, the cash contribution of the CAC, because the development by itself, the majority of it has already been zoned, and there's a amenity package that comes along with that. It doesn't include affordable housing, but that on these new additional units that we would collect cash in lieu.
Or we can make them all affordable? My understanding is that this links the property together, it's the missing piece in the middle. And so if you wanted to see affordable housing in that development anywhere, this is our opportunity to make that happen. And since the other part doesn't include any of that, but maybe it includes other amenities, I was just wondering if there's room to set this aside.
We had raised that with the applicants, whether there was going to be a proposal to include additional amenities and affordable housing, but it hasn't been proposed.
And if you can refresh my memory, how many units in the entire Scott Crescent? Approximately
I believe it's
600?
no, I think it's close to 500.
500? Okay, Councillor Chatel?
Thanks, and I would suggest that we don't look at cash in lieu, but we look at units at this point, since we're looking at having a discussion on how we're going to manage units, then we have to start asking for units and just be very firm about taking in units. Doesn't have to be all of them, I'm not going to do all of it, but having some units is going to be way more income than just asking for CIC contributions. Even one unit will be more than what our CIC contributions are going to be. So I would say that we have to start looking at a percentage of units as opposed to, so that it's a mixed-use development, not a fully standalone affordable housing development. But we have to have some, you can't do, as far as I understand, you can't have an entire unit unless you have management, and there is no separate financial help to actually have that, have a person full-time in that unit is a separate cost. But to add mixed-use density in there and some affordable housing units would be a completely reasonable ask, I think, for a developer, since they're getting 30 more units from rezoning.
Okay, so I think you're hearing that they might be wise for the applicant to present some different options for council to consider. Councillor Pryor.
Thanks. I'm curious how the OCP paid attention to the university lands.
The current OCP update does not, will not change any of the sub-area plans that are existing today. So as we're not looking at the sub-area plan for the university as part of the OCP update.
Yeah. You know, when I was reading the university agreement that they have with the district, we're supposed to update that every 5 years. And looked at it in 10 years. I just thought the OCP might have been a tool to do that. And I was adding up all these developments on the books, and you guys tallied it up for me, the end here, 3,214 units proposed. If that's a tally, is that a tally?
At the very bottom,
Yeah.
it's 3,214.
Yeah.
It's a very precarious number because, you know, a lot of these might never happen, or some of these might never happen.
Yeah.
Surely not everything on this list is
Lots of
going
them
to.
went down.
That's it. Okay, Councillor Elliott.
Our inboxes are getting letters about the application across from the school, and of course that hasn't come before council yet. And the other one is Garibaldi Springs, we're getting more letters again about that. So I'm wondering if you have any insight into the timing of when those applicants might be coming forward?
Yes. So the application that's across from the school is probably coming forward in November. We don't have a firm date set yet. I believe we're still working out some issues. We suspect that when it comes to council, it will be a straight DP without any variances, meeting all the guidelines. That's what it's looking like today. So now at this point, we're just dealing with traffic flow through the site and around it, and making sure that it's safe during construction phase and after.
So, can I ask, given that we're getting a lot of letters, are those being given to the applicant? Like, is all that feedback getting to them? Because if they're going to show up with a DP, that means, you know, that feedback from the community needs to be somewhere.
Absolutely. And Carrie Hamilton, who's the planner on that file, she's responding to the feedback that we're getting from the community. And the applicant is aware of it as well.
And then Garibaldi Springs?
And Garibaldi Springs is coming back to council for a proposed first reading October 17th.
Okay, Councillor Schwab.
Thanks, and I've heard that the applicant actually has had quite a few extensive public meetings with the public. It'd be really interesting for me to see the feedback and the response to how the developer dealt with the public feedback, and just to know how they've changed the project and how they're listening to public comments. So I think that should be available to council as well. I know that Carrie is involved in it, and they've had a lot of interaction with the public that's writing letters. So.
Okay, just checking, make sure that we're talking about the same thing. It's the teardrop site, yes.
Councillor.
How are we doing with processing times?
Processing times are standard is for a development permit 6 months to a year. It largely depends on the information that we're getting from the applicants and how quickly the discussion can happen. I suspect that we're a little longer now because we have a lot of fairly significant applications. And in terms of rezonings, our standard timeline is a year or more for a larger rezoning.
Okay, Councillor Schwab and then Councillor Alexander.
I'm interested in, if we're looking at an I know that we have quite a few planners, but if we're having engineering staff support we've got a lot of applications and the planners are working really hard, and all of this has to go through engineering as well. And do we have equal support systems in place? Whether it's the developers that pay for more support or having extra engineering support so we can actually develop faster timelines, because piling, it can go quickly through planning. We tend to think about adding planning support, but we haven't had the same support in engineering. So I'm interested in seeing a resolution to that in this year's budget.
Okay, Councillor Race.
Thank you. And when Councillor Spell was talking about public feedback, I thought she was actually talking about Garibaldi Springs, but it was a teardrop. But I think I'd be interested in the same information about Garibaldi Springs, because my understanding has been that over the past few months, there's also been a significant interaction with the community. And so I think that would also be quite important for us.
Yes, and so in the report on the Garibaldi Springs proposal, we will detail all of the changes that have happened since the last time the council has seen it.
Great, Councillor Kent.
I'd be remiss if I left out the gateway. It says finalizing the LDA on there. Would that be to indicate that the ways are kind of clear?
Yes, although we haven't, there has been new development with BC Rail and how the road closures can go forward on that side. We haven't had any contact from the developer, I don't think, since that renovation has happened.
Is that the site where the A-frame is right now, the real estate A-frame? Is that the gateway?
Yes.
All right, well, thank you. We'll move on to the next item of the agenda.
Okay.
Sure.
Thanks for this, by the way. Made it a lot easier for me.
Okay, so we have our next item, which is reverse in angle parking on Cleveland Avenue.
Thank you, Chair. Gary Buxton, General Manager, and Chris Wickham, the Director of Engineering, to give you the update. So Council identified this as an issue in 2016. Subsequently, it got put into the parking strategy. That being, for those watching, is reverse in angle parking on Cleveland Avenue. So we actually started that. We've had 2 phases of redevelopment on Cleveland, one in 2016, one this year. We started that in 2016, so the reverse installs were placed between the middle of the park and Main Street. They were removed this year when we did phase 2, which is the sort of the latter part, the southern part of that block. At that point, we probably should have come back to council and had this memo at that point in time. Having said that, we're here. We didn't have a lot of luck at all with this project. About 1 in 10 of people were using it as intended. Most people just drove straight across the centre line and just straight in, nose in, typically, as people do. Bylaw enforcement had a bit of a time. We tried lots of warnings. Again, we just didn't get the uptake. People just didn't get it. When we came to phase 2, we decided not to proceed with that and to go back to the way it was. Part of that too was that in front of the hotel, what's it called? The August Jack, I should remember that. We didn't want to put back in stalls there, because then you're going to have people reversing right up with their tailpipes basically right in front of the sliding doors on those hotel units. So it didn't seem appropriate to do it there regardless. We've checked in with one of our nearby communities, City of New West, who's used that prototype. They had exactly the same problem with people using it not as intended. They ended up putting a centerline divider in to solve the problem, so you physically could not cross the centerline and drive nose in. It took many years of education and enforcement before it was successful there. So because of the enforcement issues, because of the latter half was mostly in front of the August Jack, we decided not to proceed with it. We did have some other issues with if people back in and they've got long beds on their trucks, it tends to overhang the sidewalk in some cases. If you've got a little boulevard, you can bypass that issue. But I mean, so we didn't reinstitute it on phase 2. So right now it's nose in or parallel parking along that block of Cleveland. We should have come back at that point in time to let council know. It was actually in the drawings for phase 2, but we didn't point that out to you, so I'm not going to say that we told you, because we didn't, because we moved very quickly through that project, and we should have at that point said, look, it's not working, we're not we're not planning on doing it in phase 2. I mean, if council wants, we can burn off those lines. We can go back. Again, it'll be an enforcement issue, and I really wouldn't recommend that we do it in front of the hotel. Having people park back right up to those hotel doors. Longer term, I mean, we could put a no-post barrier in. That's not the best for sightliness. I mean, it's just a concrete temporary barrier in the middle of the road. That's going to hinder people crossing the road. It would hinder access into the hotel if it's continuous. So, I mean, snow removal as well would be trickier, because that's usually where we windrow and stockpile before we remove it. That's sort of a short-term temporary solution that might address the enforcement issue. Longer term, we could put a planted median in. That's going to be expensive. Cut and pour and then do all the landscaping. That's tens of thousands of dollars as a solution. Yeah, you'd be able to cross, but that's a much longer-term solution. So I think that's probably the update for council on that issue.
Okay, yeah, Councillor Schwab.
Thanks. I heard a lot about overhanging sidewalks. I didn't hear anything about cyclist safety and cyclist actually having bike lanes down there, and none of that addresses. We really need to finish that parking. Instead, this all has to do with a lot of other things, and just saying it didn't work, that's too bad. I accept that, and I accept that it's expensive to change people's behavior. And what I don't accept is that we have really crappy bike lanes all the way down that finish in replacement of car traffic, and the fact that we can't educate people to just back in instead of pulling forward. You know, like, if you have a solution for how we get bike traffic down safely, and I know in the long term we are looking at better things, but meanwhile we're improving our road and our landscaping in that area with no regards to cycling safety. So now we tell everybody to use it, we mark on the road, mountain bikes right to a certain point, and then what? You just keep on going and have people backing up because they don't look at cyclists. They have no visual ability to know when the cyclist is coming, and there's people with chariots, and that's a lot more expensive than line painting, is having somebody back up into a cyclist. So I'm just not sure. I hear all your concerns and the expenses and everything. I just don't hear what we do with the continuation in front of a public park and tourist infrastructure on moving pedestrians and cyclists safely. And I know we need parking, and those 10 spots are incredibly important to people. And we can't remove them until we have a centralized resolution, but I also don't hear active transportation solutions.
No, I mean, to be honest, it wasn't safe for vehicles or cyclists with the way people were using it. I mean, it just wasn't working. And it was frankly worse than having the sort of typical nose-in angle parking. So
I don't disagree with you at all.
I think I would just add to that the active transportation plan doesn't put separate bike lanes down Cleveland. It puts them down Third and Pemberton, and sort of around the downtown core, and then a shared road as we see today with the share roads, etc., down Cleveland. So we don't plan on having the separate bike lanes in that area.
Right.
We did look at if we went to parallel parking across the entire block, we lose 12 stalls. So again, we can do that.
That was going to be my question. Mary?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I don't think we gave this enough effort. I think I think we could have done more with bylaw. I think we could have put those pilings there for a while to give people the visual cue that you can't just do a U and go into the spot. Those ones that we put all over the place to delineate, they don't cost a lot of money. We have them in the works yard. We could have put just in front of the hotel electric or hybrid vehicle only. When hybrids start up, they don't start up their combustion engine. There's 10 stalls in front of the hotel that could have been making a bit of a statement about where we're trying to help prioritize some of the, whether it's electric or hybrid or small vehicles. Maybe it's only smart cars, so you don't have the, or smart car type things. So you don't have the big trucks, small vehicle only. So I mean, everything I saw in the report, I think there was sort of a creative solution we could have come to. It's going to take some time to help people change their behavior. We knew that when we first implemented it. But we needed a robust plan to be able to actually help people change their behavior. And I don't believe we should put concrete barriers down there, but maybe just some of these pilings. We didn't give it a chance to actually work. I agree we're not going to make separated bike lanes there, but we're not going to prevent people from biking. People are going to bike on Cleveland. It's the most direct route to get to places. People are going to bike on Cleveland because they're going to come down an end route and then go half a block in to get to a store or a restaurant or a dentist or whatever. So I just don't think we gave it enough. I think it was kind of a bit of an easy solution to just go back to what the status quo was 2 years ago. And I don't think we sort of problem solved on how we could have actually sort of achieved some of our goals with regard to safety for cyclists. Maybe achieve other goals like giving some prioritization to electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, and some easy visual cues that actually got people to change their behavior.
Councillor Cryer.
Yeah, thanks. The staff kind of answered my question to Sue's point on bike lanes. And, I mean, to me, it's clear that Waters Lane and Third and then cross Main, and so I think we're okay on bike lanes. I mean, I think that's a pretty good strategy. The backing in, I mean, I saw all sorts of people over the last couple of years, like you say, they drive in from the other side of the road, and you know, it's all sorts of, you know, they go back and forward. And I think what the problem is it's not educate. I mean, we could educate Squamishites, but it's the 100,000 tourists that come in that you can't educate, and they're the ones that, you know, that make it so. I agree with canceling it. I mean, I know you can teach me, but you can't teach people when they're just driving in the first time to visit, and they go like, what the heck are we doing here? And they fall right across the street, or they go, you know. So it's only 8 parking stalls. I don't think it's going to make or break us.
It's not just 8 parking stalls. Councillor Cryer?
Yeah, how many parking stalls are we talking about?
10.
Because we're talking about both sides of the street, right?
Yeah,
Well, we
I
only
believe
did-
it's about
the test
14
area
on
was
each
one
side.
side of the street.
Yeah. It's about 14 each side.
So my question to staff, and I'll go to Councillor Elliott, what if we made it parallel parking only on this park side? And then you had the pull-in, what would be the net loss there? I'd be interested to know that. Because I mean, it is, I think it's, you know, we have our OCM Pavilion and Key Park, and you know, you have these cars just driving right in, pointing right at the grass, you know. Maybe there might be an argument to put just parallel on that side and then leave the Chieftain side, or not the Chieftain side, but August Jack side, because, you know, we know that that street standard is not up to standard and will get redone in future years. So I wonder what that loss would look like, or if there's, you know, even a way to reduce it a little bit. I don't know. That might be sort of a. But I'll go to Councillor Elliott. What do you think?
So I think that this was the right decision. I think it works when it's on both sides of the street. We possibly missed an opportunity to put in some sort of bike and pedestrian space between the parking and park. But, you know, if people want to revisit it now, we'll just refer it to the budget. Because all it takes is money and will, but we're not going to solve it today. You know, this was the one thing that I got a lot of flack for, because we don't have nearly close the amount of bylaw folks to enforce it, especially when it's just impacting one side of the street. And I like how that road looks now. It is much better down there, and to put plastic down the middle, I think takes away from what we were trying to create. So certainly, I frequent that park a lot with my family, and we find a safe way to get there.
Councillor Rice and Councillor Carney.
Thank you. And I also agree with the decision that and like everybody else, looked at all of the oddities that happened with the other thing. I think the worst thing would be the inconsistency to have it one way on one side of the street, and another way on another side of the street, one way in that block and another way in other blocks. And I'm kind of inclined to say, get rid of the angle parking. I think that's the thing that's causing the problem. And I recognize we lose some parking spots. If you got rid of the angle parking and went to parallel parking, and you end up with something like Second Avenue, you now have the ability, if you wanted to add a bike lane, you have the ability there. But what you do is you just open up the street a little bit more. And Cleveland Avenue is our main street, and it could be wider. It doesn't need to be as compressed. But I think the difficulty is sort of justifying the loss of the traveled roadway with angled parking, at least for me. And the issue is that no matter how you cut it, somebody's backing up at some point, and the whole thing is happening kind of in an odd way, whether you're going back end first or front end first, and all the overhang issues and so forth that relates to it. So I'd be inclined to think in the downtown area, we started looking at getting rid of that kind of stuff.
Councillor Pryor and then Mayor Heinzen.
You know, I remember on the east side of the park there when, you know, the park started to get busier and busier, we made the decision to put a fence along there, keep the kids from running out into the traffic. That to me really enhanced that park. And I don't know whose comment talking, I think it was Jason talking about the cars pushing up against the park. You know, we could either go a short hedge all the way along where the parking is, or we could go a fence. But I do think, you know, something along that side as well would be good. And if we need more bike lane, I mean, once you get into the downtown core, I mean, I understand people ride their bikes, but you know, at some point you're into the downtown core, you gotta get off your bike and walk it. Otherwise, we need bike lanes everywhere, and we just don't have the road widths for that. But on the park side there, I do think cutting off the parking from the park a little bit with either a hedge or a little fence like on the other side would make it safer for kids, and you know, just put two or three little entrances in. People park their car, they walk up through the gate, and they get in, and that would be good, I think.
Okay, Mayor Heinzen.
Yeah, I would agree that if you are going to change angled parking in the community, you have to do it everywhere. We can't just sort of do a little bit here, a little bit there. I'm looking at the aerial, and Second Avenue is interesting. It's all parallel parking on the west side, and it's all angled parking on the east side. Cleveland goes from parallel to angled to parallel. It's all over the place. I would be interested in seeing what parallel parking looks like along that block between the parks and the hotel. But I think we'd have to do it in concert with some rejigging of Main Street. And again, as Councillor Elliott said, it comes back to budget decisions. In terms of Main Street actually getting more parking on it, it's not developed right now, so maybe we're waiting for that to happen. But it's a total mishmash right now, you know. Even on Winnipeg, it's angled parking east of Cleveland and parallel parking north of Cleveland. I mean, it's really all over the place. But yeah, I'd be interested in seeing what parallel parking looks like along the parks, both east and west side.
Mr.
The chair asked a little while ago how many spots we lose, and we lose, I believe it's 7 slots per side.
Per side.
We choose, roughly.
That's good to know. So what I'm hearing is I don't think council is of one mind on this issue. But I am hearing from at least 4 members of council that there may be an openness to consider parallel parking on this block. So if we could perhaps have staff take a look at this options. Is everybody okay with maintaining the status quo in the interim, which is our nose-in angled parking, with staff coming back for recommendations on parallel parking, and also wondering if council would like to see any kind of proposal or cost estimate for a short fence or hedge along the perimeter of the park, or if that's something that we should save for later in the budget process. So, I'm gonna let Councillor, we're gonna go to CAO first.
Thank you, Chair. I would just prefer if we could have an actual motion, so staff have formal direction for what the council's looking for.
Okay, we will do that, I promise.
We are having a discussion about parking coming up, I understand, soon.
Is
That's
that,
CCL.
do we have parking on our agenda in the near future?
Through the chair, yes, the parking utilisation study, we've seen the first cut at it, so yeah, probably November.
That's right.
Yeah, I know that some people aren't happy with this. I'm happy to revisit it, but I'd like to get the parking strategy and understand our utilization and see what the plan is for Main Street and see what's in the active transportation budget for this year, and then decide whether we want to put more money on this block this year or just wait. And to see how it all sort of pans out. I know it's not ideal for everyone. We may have missed an opportunity, but there are lots of other priorities, and we get to figure out what our parking strategy says about utilization, and we shouldn't be making decisions about whether we're taking parking spots away until we're really quite sure that we can do that without rocking the boat too much in the other direction.
I'm with Karen.
Okay, and just to clarify with staff, if we were to move to a parallel parking scenario, is that pretty much just a line painting exercise? So would it be fair to say that line painting, from what I understand, is not usually the most expensive, although I'm assuming we wouldn't be able to do it in the winter months. Is that usually
Correct.
the case?
Correct on both,
So-
yes, it's not a huge budget item, but it would probably have to wait until the spring to burn those off and repaint them.
Okay, so what I'm thinking, given all of those considerations, is that perhaps
Just wait for the
we wait for the parking strategy discussion to occur, but staff has sort of the heads up that we would perhaps like to see some options around this block, around parallel parking in the future.
So I think I'll make the motion that staff maintain the status quo until further options are considered.
Seconded by Councillor Pryor. Any further discussion on the motion? All right, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, everybody, we're only 37 minutes behind schedule, so no rush, though. These are important items. And we are now to item 5.3, which is OCP scheduling update. And let staff get acquainted with the computer.
Our
welcome.
PowerPoint has disappeared.
Uh-oh,
We're having network issues.
network issues. Okay.
Yeah, Pro IT.
That's scary.
That's the,
We're going to take a recess for 2 minutes. Okay, we are back in the Community Development Standing Committee for October 3rd. We are on agenda item 5.3, our official community plan schedule update.
Great, thank you, Chair. It's Sarah McJanet here, Community Planning with my co-pilot, Matt Gunn. And today we're here to bring an update and share next steps in Phase 4 of the OCP, including key tasks and a proposed timeline, tentative timeline to get the plan to the finish line, or to use an earlier metaphor, to land the OCP Airbus and get this thing done. So on the graphic, you'll see that we're in Phase 4, finalizing the plan and approvals. And that will take us into Q1 of 2018, including the formal approvals process. So on this next slide, I will show you. Wow, this is not advancing? So there we go, thank you. So this slide shows proposed dates leading up to and including the formal approvals process. These are tentative and subject to change, but to give you a sense of what we're trying to land on. It is a compressed timeline, but what we're aiming to do is to maintain the positive forward momentum that we've had with the project and get a first reading of the OCP bylaw to council before the end of the year, and then allow for scheduling of a public hearing in 2018 in late January. So I'll just walk you through some of the dates here. So through October, November, we are engaged in finalizing the draft plan, continuing to work with the inputs, the significant inputs that we received in phase 3 of the process. And we're also continuing to engage with agencies in Squamish Nation as part of this finalization process. We plan to present a preview of the OCP draft bylaw jointly to Council and our Community Advisory Committee that's been working with us throughout the process to ensure that we're on track prior to a release of the OCP December 1. And this would allow basically 10 to 12 days for the community to have a look at the draft plan before it's on an agenda for a council first reading. Typically, as you know, an agenda will go out to the community the Thursday prior to the Tuesday meeting. So we wanted to provide a little bit more time for the community to have a look at it. As you can see on the slide, we are aiming for a first reading of the bylaw December 12th. And should council consider and give first reading to the bylaw December 12th, we would then do our required OCP referrals of the bylaw to agencies and, for example, to the Agricultural Land Commission, required referrals. And then aiming for a second reading of the bylaw in early January. After second reading, we do notifications. Those are statutory notifications in the paper, so we'd allow for 2 weeks for those notifications to go out. And then scheduling of a public hearing or hearings later in January. So we have an initial date of January 23rd tentatively highlighted with an additional date as needed. And we are intending and envisaging the public hearing process to be another major community event as part of the formal approvals process. We're planning to host, and we've booked out Brennan Park for the public hearing, and that would allow us maximum capacity to be able to have everyone come out. Following public hearing, of course, there's third reading of a bylaw and fourth reading, and we've just put February as a placeholder there, and that's going to just depend on how things progress. And I just have one last slide, and then we'll just put it out to council for any, or this committee for any comments or questions. Just to give you some sense of the communications and the engagement around this final phase. With a December 1 community release, of course, we will have lots of updates and communications out in the community to let everyone know that the final draft OCP bylaw is out. This would include updates to the project page and also doing communiques through all of our channels that we've been using all along. So our OCP listserv and on social media and e-news, etc. And because we had such success with the OCP pop-ups and so much traction with the community, Matt and I would like to do another round of OCP pop-ups. So basically with the community release, it would mean we would get out on the street and basically build awareness around the final draft plan, let the public and the community know how the formal approvals process works, how to engage at every stage as we go. There might even be a Santa Parade OCP float. I don't know, but I'm just
I like it.
Throw down Matt doesn't even want me to say that out loud, but it'd be awesome. And then finally, we wanted to also highlight for council, so not only will we have the OCP text bylaw, but we also have the OCP maps and schedules. So in the same way that we release the discussion draft, we will have a set of OCP schedules. Those are static maps, schedules that will be available. But also we've been working with Dan Griffin, and so what we're wanting to do is basically put the proposed OCP schedules on a bit of a map portal so that the community can actually go online and then have the OCP schedules that are proposed be an active, interactive layer essentially for people. And there's also an opportunity for the community to leave geo-referenced comments that we'll be able to see and track as well. So that's exciting. And then we're also thinking about test driving a little bit of an OCP story map just to give just to summarize kind of the whole process. And so Dan Griffin's really excited for us to try out something like that. So more info to come on that, but we just wanted to give council a sense of some of those key communication and engagement pieces as well. So with that said, open to questions or comments and feedback about the proposed timeline.
Okay, I got Councillor Kent and then Councillor Bragg.
I love the idea of the GIS map portal, and a lot of comments to be made in that manner. I think it's fantastic. Kudos for that.
Kudos to Dan, our GIS
Well,
guru.
and for you guys for implementing it too. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Bragg.
So could you or would you do a pop-up up at the university?
Absolutely. We don't, sorry, through the chair, we haven't worked through any of the detailed pop-up stops yet. Our focus right now is plan finalization, but as we get a little bit closer, we will put a bit of a plan together for the pop-ups.
And in anticipation of the final draft, is there wording in there connecting the OCP to the Sudbury plan at the university?
Yes, through the chair. We recognize all of the Sudbury plans formally in the OCP so that they are then attached and become part of the OCP. So it is actually a schedule amendment or
Yeah,
attached.
because in the Sudbury plan, we're supposed to review Quest every 5 years, and we haven't been doing that.
Right, anybody else on council? Comments, questions, concerns? My part, I think the timeline looks pretty good. If we get that achieved in that timeline, that would be great. And yeah, I don't have anything else to add, so you guys are off the hook.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just one thing, we envision the legislated piece of the adoption a little differently. Normally, we come in, do the first reading, come back second, but we actually want to stretch that time a little bit and really try to use that to turn it into one of our significant public engagement pieces. And then by having the public hearing offsite at a larger venue, I think we can kind of use some of the same tone that we had in other engagement pieces. So I think we can really utilize this in a different way than most public hearings.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a very progressive way of doing it. So I have Councillor Chappelle and Mayor Benson.
Thanks. I was just wondering about pulling out, I totally agree, this timeline's excellent, and I like the idea of separate pop-ups again. We pull out the employment piece, so it's not going to be just about green space, and I'd like to actually pull out employment engagement someplace, because I know we've done some engagement with the chamber, and there's been some really good engagement around that, but I want to make sure that it's recognized that we're not just thinking about green spaces, but we also think about future employment land.
Just to clarify through the chair, are you saying once we have our final draft that we're taking out to the community, that we make a specific time to have commentary, to receive commentary about the employment piece?
Yeah, because I think the OCB can be really overwhelmed with issues and looking towards future employment, and also letting the community know about employment lands that are coming, and that zoning for employment lands, what that looks like, so that people can comment.
And just to add on to that, like maybe that's something that our fantastic economic development officer could, maybe you guys could work in tandem on that. Your Heinz.
Yeah, I like the timeline. Worried a little bit that December 1st to December 12th is a little, it's Christmas party season and might be a little skimpy. However, there's a lot of time between first reading and second reading, which, even though the Christmas holidays, gives people some time. I actually almost think we should just simply book both public hearing days. Simply make 2 dates available. I know it says as needed though.
I've made 3 days available.
Okay, but I think we should actually firmly commit to at least 2 days of public hearing to allow people to have options to show up, as opposed to just saying as needed.
And would we be doing 2 different locations if that's the case?
No, it'll be recessed to resume at the same place. We're, just because of the size of the venue, we're expecting a lot of people, and Brenham Park holds the greatest number. We can actually hold over 100, 200, 300 people.
Okay.
Yeah, and can we maybe make sure we do public transportation on those evenings and even make it free on those 2 nights? Be something to consider.
Good idea.
Chair, through you, we're also looking at some of the recreation specialists that could help us out with childcare during the heat.
Oh, great.
As well.
That's a great idea.
Excellent.
Awesome.
All right, thank you. Okay, we're on to item 5.4, Denville Park update.
Thanks very much.
And we've made up 3 minutes of time, so we're only 33 minutes behind.
Well done.
Yeah.
Can you just put it on?
Yeah.
I'm just going to upload the presentation.
Sure.
All right, so the presentation's pretty quick. It just summarizes the content in the memo. And my name's Asia Cole, planner with Community Planning and Infrastructure. And this is Carrie Hamilton with Community Planning. And I'm just waiting for it to start.
It was a bit slower on other presentations too, so.
Yeah. I can maybe just start speaking to it. Yeah.
Admiral.
Totally. So we did a questionnaire and then ran 2 open houses over the summer. The questionnaire was open for 1 month and we received 225 responses, which I was pretty pleased with. We hand-delivered notification to every household in the Denville and Wilson Crescent neighborhoods and also invited them to the open houses with that notification. We did, for the 2 open houses, we received less than 10 people to each of the 2 events. It was held over an afternoon, 3:30 to 6:30 in the middle of the week at the Squamish Elementary playground. So not quite as successful as the online questionnaire. And we essentially asked 2 main questions. The first one was, I'll just go to the next one. We asked what types of play equipment people wanted to see, and the top 3 results were of course, a multi-play structure. Second was swings, and then third was natural play equipment, so stuff like boulders and natural logs. And then the second question we asked was, what additional features would you like to see in the park? The number 1 priority was the mountain bike skills area or a pump track. And then second was seating, gathering, and picnic areas. And then third was a community look-in. And so moving forward, right now, Carrie and I are actively searching for somebody in the Denville neighborhood to act as a community champion that we can liaise with and work towards reaching a preliminary design. And we'd like to start into the design stage, so looking at all of the feedback and a design that takes into consideration the different site aspects. So location, solar access, what kind of surface, drainage, all of those different types of considerations. And then finally, we'll be coordinating with the proposed affordable housing project that's being directed by Nicola right now. that's it.
All right, Councilor Craig.
Yeah, great, I'll go first. Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, it's funny, you read the comments and first I'm trying to get an idea of how big the park can be, so if there's room to expand as years go by, because I know most dots are on the location closest to the high school, so I assume that's going to be the location. It was interesting to read that people that lived in the apartments didn't really, some people didn't want to park across from them, they didn't want the light, and they didn't want kids playing, keeping them awake. So I thought that was a good thing, and they didn't want it on a busy road. So that's what I thought too. So I thought, good, there's hope, we'll go in a bit. But mostly, is there room for expansion? And it kind of looked like no dog park in the area. I mean, nobody wanted dogs with the playground, and nobody wanted gardens. And so that's why I was hoping that wherever we pick, there would be room to expand for maybe a dog park and some vegetable beds.
Through the chair, there was request for community gardens, not necessarily in the written comments, but in the options that they selected,
Yeah, okay.
that was fourth in the
Good.
number of options. And then the dog park, I think, is a potentially kind of split where people really want it or they really don't want it.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a polarizing subject. It might not be the right location for a community-wide dog park. And I'm not sure where Parks is at on that. I know that's been identified in the Parks and Rec master plan and stuff.
So how about on the, how big is the area going to be set aside for a park?
So we're coordinating with Macola. We'd like to try to get as much space as we possibly can, but bearing in mind that that's been kind of earmarked for affordable housing. We're going to have to work really closely with them.
Yeah.
But I think the idea is to try to make the design as efficient as possible, make the parking as efficient as possible to get the amount of land that we need to do a park on.
The vegetable gardens could go along the busy street. Okay.
Okay.
That's great.
Okay,
Oh, and maybe the Quest students could help you. You said you were looking for neighborhood champions, and I don't know whether they wanted to be a champion.
Councilor Kent.
Yeah, I'm happy that we're working very closely with Macola on this because of the proposed affordable housing going in there. And just, I see in the scope that the funds that are available can only sort of accomplish about, it's going to take half the current budget to get to just basically the clearing stage in that area.
The
And I'd
site
just
prep costs.
Yeah, so I'd just be sort of wanting to see that close relationship with Macola in order to make sure that we don't sort of do work in there that we don't need to spend money on. Because it's going to, when it comes down to it with Macola's input, that's going to sort of dominate a lot of how.
Yeah,
the
there might be
outcome is.
some efficiencies and, kill two birds with one stone kind of.
So specifically on the budget, and I'm going to go to Councilor Elliott. So are there any DCC funds available to put towards this project? Do we not have any DC, there was never any DCC bylaw funds for something, there's no park list? Okay,
Clarification?
Mayor Heinzman, clarification?
My understanding is the Park DCC is for purchase of land, correct? So if we thought that this wasn't the location and there was something else that needed to be purchased, then we could amend the bylaw to include that, could we not?
So there's two funds, one of which is the cash in lieu of park funds that we collect at subdivision, yes, can only be used for purchasing new lands. The DCC bylaw has specific projects in it only which you can spend money on, and I'm going to check again, but I'm 99% sure this is not in the DCC bylaw, so there isn't a pot of money to develop a park. There is money, as the mayor notes, to buy land should we want to do that.
That we could amend the bylaw.
So,
We could amend the bylaw.
yeah, and I'm thinking, just in general for this area, because there are other rezoning applications in the hopper and there has been rezonings in the area, there should be some funds available, but,
There is a CAC that
Yeah.
was made by the Newport Landing Development, and that was directly tied to the playground on that site.
And did we not get any CACs from the project that's further south on Buckley, the townhouse development there?
No, through the chair. So that was already pre-zoned and it went
Okay.
straight to development permit.
Okay, that's why.
And most of those projects along Wilson Crescent are pre-zoned, right? It's already multifamily, so
Okay.
we're not getting any CACs out of that.
Okay, thank you. And so probably all the more reason why we should probably take a special look at a DCC for this area as it grows and rezones. So I've got Councillor Elliott and then Councillor Race.
So one, we should see if we need to put a little bit of money aside in this year's budget to help this project along. So I'd put that on people's radars. And from a design perspective, I hosted the table at the World Cafe at the high school about why young adults use or don't use our facilities. And one of the things that they stress is that they often feel like they don't have their own space. So at the library, there's lots of little kids, and at Brennan Park, there's lots of little kids around. And so if we're going to combine this park with the affordable housing and the skate park and where the youth center currently is, we need to really contemplate what that means for the teenagers that use that space, because they don't want to feel like they've got adults looking over their shoulder. And also another design thing is at some of the elementary schools, the most beloved part of the playground is the forest that's still there. And so I know we're talking about putting in logs and boulders potentially, but just leaving forest is actually very beneficial.
And through the chair, there's quite a few comments that spoke to preserving at least the trees as cover, sunshade, and windbreak. So I think our intention would be to preserve whatever trees we possibly could. Obviously, with a tree assessment, there's quite a few older deciduous trees, and those aren't always great to preserve, but yeah.
And through the chair, just to respond about the youth center, so we've actually been engaging with youth center since day one. Because we did the engagement over the summertime, they actually didn't have a lot of programs to integrate and to do an engagement with them specifically, but we still are looking to integrate, to do an engagement with them. So that's a next step for that as well. And now that we do know a little bit more around what Macola is developing, we can also engage around that whole development with them. So the intention is to work with them closer.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and just to say, I'm with Councillor Elliott on this. Like, I think that this is one area where we should put in extra money than we might normally do in other areas, just to the point that the Wilson Crescent Denville area, it's really lacking in amenities, and just realizing right now that we have limited opportunities to even recover monies as it gets redeveloped, that we should get this one right so that they have a nice amenity for the whole area. So we got Councillor Race, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, and it's just on the budget issue, because in the report it talked about doing some things now and some things possibly later, and what occurred to me is that some of these things seem like fairly quick wins. A pump track and natural features and so forth are relatively low cost and can get people activated very quickly. The other thing, just thinking about this discussion, and Ms. Matthews isn't here today to frown at me when I mention it, we do have surplus monies, and we have talked about keeping surplus monies aside for key contingencies, working capital, etc. But my recollection is we didn't account for everything. So I think the staff will find if they really look hard, there can be budget options that we can think about next spring to finish this. Because I agree with Councillor Jackson, Blackman-Wolf, that we want to do this quickly. And I did it as far as possible, as soon as possible for that area.
Yeah, and to that point, as we're getting it as far as possible, as soon as possible, I think a key priority for me is also safety. Because if we do some clearing in there and open it up to kids, I go in and out of there quite frequently with my boys to the skate park, and cars come down that turn, around that corner quite quickly. And if you have little kids in there kicking balls or playing or whatever, and it's not fenced, I don't even want to think about that.
Yeah.
So, very important to have some kind of a fencing up on that side.
Right. And before we finish this item, I put you guys on the spot a little bit, but I noticed in the written comments that there was a lot of support for a splash park, but I didn't see that in any of the summaries. Maybe you might want to explain why that is the case.
Through the chair, I think that even a basic budget for a splash park well outweighs what we could achieve here.
And if I may, Chair, we've been getting a lot of feedback regarding Splash Park generally. And so in terms of budget engagement, that's one item that we're going to bring forward for council to consider getting engagement.
Excellent. All right, any more comments? All right, thank you. Okay. Well, we're only 18 minutes behind schedule, so doing well. Item 5.5, integrated flood and hazard management plan adoption.
Good afternoon, Chair and Council. So the intent of today's presentation is to, my name is David Rolson. I'm a municipal engineer with the District of Squamish. The intent of today's presentation is to gain Council's authorization to finalize and adopt the Integrated Flood Hazard Management Plan. So over the course of the project team has provided 11 detailed presentations, and there's been quite extensive discussion, including a summary of the final draft plan on June 20th of this year. And so the intent today is not to go over the plan in detail again, but just to provide a very brief overview of the project and to focus on work that we've done to finalize the plan since the last council meeting. So over the past 3 years, we have completed the initial 3 phases, which was a background and gap analysis, preparing a coastal flood mitigation strategy and a river flood mitigation strategy. And all of that technical work was brought together into a final integrated flood hazard management plan that includes a prioritized plan for dike upgrades, as well as a flood policy framework that I'll discuss. There's over 100 recommendations in the plan, but the core mitigation strategies are shown on this slide, and that is to improve our dike protection by addressing our deficiencies and upgrading to a higher standard for some dikes. I'll talk about that in more detail. To accommodate flood hazards by raising new development up above the flood construction level and preserving floodways through the community. Limiting densification in the highest hazard areas through official community plan policy, and encouraging growth in safer areas, which is also in our official community plan policy. We have a comprehensive policy framework. The Integrated Flood Hazard Management Plan itself is a background plan with very little legislative authority, but the actual legislative authority comes from official community plan policy, which outlines broad goals and objectives, as well as the land use policy. The OCP, or the draft OCP, includes a development permit area, which regulates development in floodways and debris flow hazard areas. And we have a floodplain bylaw, which regulates building elevations, setbacks, and construction specifications. We have a plan to improve dike protection within Squamish over the next several decades. That's highlighted by 3 key components. The first is to correct existing dike deficiencies with our dike system. The second is to build a new sea dike according to the implementation plan outlined in our coastal flood mitigation strategy. And as a long-term objective, to adopt a higher standard of protection for the Squamish River Dike and the Mamcombe River South Dike, which protect dense development in the downtown core. Those projects have been prioritized based on the likelihood of a dike failure, the consequences if it were to fail, and they've been cost weighted so that the final prioritized plan achieves the most risk reduction at the lowest cost. We've completed an extensive community consultation through the course of the plan at the Involve level of the International Association of Public Participation Spectrum. That's included open houses, online surveys, dedicated workshops with stakeholders. This is the 12th council meeting, targeted Squamish Nation meetings, and many other consultation activities. And so the final IFHMP online survey results do show strong community support for the plan. On June 20th, the project team presented to council, and we received some feedback on the plan, including a desire to see a funding strategy for how we're going to fund the dike upgrades, as well as to prepare a developer guide so that developers can have a clear and concise picture of how development will be regulated. Those items will be brought back to council in the fall of 2017 as part of the implementation of the plan. A week after that presentation, the project team presented to the Squamish Nation. We received written feedback from them. A quick summary of some of their most important feedback was they wanted a statement of effects of the historical impacts of dike construction on reserve land. They also stated that they have a no net loss of land policy for reserve lands, and so that's relevant for future dike construction needs on reserve land. They want to discuss right-of-ways and establishing protocols for the district completing dike maintenance on reserve land. They also indicated that they don't provide a blanket support for the super dike concept, which is the higher standard of protection for the Squamish River dike. That would require review on a project-by-project basis. And they included several other items as well that is written in the appendix of the report. So based on that feedback, we made some additions to the final reports, and many of their comments will be addressed through the implementation of the plan. On the same day, we held the third open house, the third and final open house of the project. That included a presentation to 23 attendees, as well as an open forum discussion and question and answer period. We received some excellent comments and questions from the community. Overall, there was a high level of support. One of the repeating themes was a request for public education around the district's emergency management, and also what people should plan to do in a flood. And so that is one thing that district staff continue to work on, and we will be creating a flood information webpage on the district's website as part of the implementation of this plan. And finally, we held a fourth online survey. There were 57 responses to that survey, indicating a strong level of support. 77% agreed with the official community plan policy, over 80% agreed with the DPA and the floodplain bylaw, and 91% agreed with the overall dike improvement approach. So based on all of that feedback, the project team finalized the reports, and the final draft IFHMP is attached to the report to council. So the next steps after adoption of the IFHMP is to bring back a floodplain bylaw for council's authorization, as well as OCP policy. We'll also be working to determine a funding plan, including determining funding sources and appropriate annual allowances for flood protection improvements. That report will come back to council in the fall of 2017. Over the next 10 years, we'll be implementing flood protection improvements, regulating new development with the new flood policy framework, and continuing to engage with the Squamish Nation. And it's scheduled to update the IFHMP about every 10 years, or if new climate change information becomes available, to provide intermediate updates to the plan. And so with that, the recommendation is that the District of Squamish finalize and adopt the Integrated Flood Hazard Management Plan and begin implementation of the plan. Thank you. Back to the chair for questions and discussion.
All right, thank you. We have Councillor Race first.
Thank you. And there's two things, and I think you've answered one of them. One of the things I hadn't appreciated is that this plan will do away with the need for property by property assessment for an FCL. and add predictability to it. And my question was really around, is that periodically updated? And you mentioned 10 years, every 10 years. But would you also review it or update it, or is there a process for updating it if there was some other natural occurrence which happened in the middle of a 10-year period that might require it? And the second was around the sea dike issues. And in one of the maps, it shows study area 1 and study area 2, and how we intend to deal with those. And I'm particularly concerned with the one that's at the foot of Cleveland Avenue, or the end of Cleveland Avenue, and how we intend to resolve that study area.
Okay, through the chair. So in terms of updating the integrated flood hazard management plan, we would probably provide intermediate updates if we had new provincial policy with something like sea level rise projections. If that were to change, that would probably trigger an update to our policy. Also, if we had a major flood event that significantly changed the peak flow estimates for what we consider a 1 in 200 year flood, that could also trigger an update to our flood construction levels. So any sort of new significant climate information that could change how we view flood risk would probably be a trigger for, if not a complete overhaul of the plan, at least an updating of flood construction levels.
And the study areas?
Okay, and the study areas, we have actually been working on study area 2 at the staff level. We've been looking, there have been some development applications in that area, including the Squamish Oceanfront development and a parcel that's immediately at the head of Cattermole Slough. And so at the staff level, we have been working and coming up with plans for how the sea dike is going to work through that area, how it's going to tie in with the raised landmass of the Oceanfront Peninsula. It probably is worth coming back to council with a report on that and sort of a visioning of how we see that working together and ensure that council is supportive of that plan. There are still some details to work out, but I think we've been determining some of the technical solutions to how that will work.
Do we have an idea of sort of what the general timeline for that would be to come back to council?
Particularly on study area 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're probably pretty close to being able to come back and speak to council about that maybe within the next 2 months.
Okay, Councillor Elliott, Councillor Cryer, and Mayor Hanson.
One of the things I wondered, based on the Squamish Nation feedback, is I know we have a glossary of technical terms, but I wonder if we need a glossary of pronunciation. Because I know that we put Squamish Nation in brackets, but that's not actually how you pronounce the words that are there, and as well the pronunciation, a phonetic pronunciation in for the reserve names. So I don't know whether that needs to be in this report or in our bylaw, but it would just be great if people started learning how to pronounce these.
That's a fair point. And that has been one of the points that the Squamish Nation requested of the district, is that we include Squamish Nation place names and reserve names, the traditional spellings. And so we have taken steps to incorporate that. Certainly there are challenges for people not familiar with the language and pronunciation. One possible solution would be to include something on our website or in an overall district document as opposed to just within the IFHMP. I would suggest that.
Yeah, I just think it needs to be somewhere. Be great. Thank you for considering that.
Councillor Cryer.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, back to study area 2. And, you know, of course, it's an area that I've been paying attention to for 25 years. In 1994, when the flood management plan came out, as you guys know, they studied all of the downtown and came up with clear direction on how to resolve it and a temporary fix. And there was clear direction there to move forward on something. I've been on council 6 years now, talking about it for 6 years. So I know you guys are coming back in a few months from the sounds of things. hopefully it'll be to give us a ticket price on how to do the temporary fix on what they recommended in 1994. Because I'm pretty sure the only thing that'll be different is the height, but the temporary fix is still going to be at the 3.3. If you go down to the end of Cleveland Avenue, like Councillor Race was just mentioning, and I'm pretty sure I tried to walk with you guys at high tide. At the end of Cleveland Avenue, there's 4 inches, the highest tide of the year, 4 inches. And I know it breached there one time, and the wall of water coming in there, it filled up the whole south end of the downtown in about 15 minutes. 4 inches. So anyway, I mean, you've heard me say it a few times over the last 4 or 5 years, so let's get it done before the end of this year, it'd be great. Thanks.
Okay, Mayor Hanson.
Thanks. Question about CACs as a potential funding. I thought we had determined not to use CACs in this. There's quite a bit of reference. I worry that, and we've been really clear at UBCM that DCCs should not go into this because a lot of municipalities still feel like this is a download from the provincial government. And we had a lot of conversation about CACs not going into this. There's a whole bunch of text in here about how CACs may be used. If anything, I'd like to put that at the very bottom and preface it with in extreme extenuating circumstances or something to that effect. I don't want a developer to come in here and say, we can just take all our CAC money to put into this dike work. And I'm not sure how we got to where we are here with this. I thought we had directed not to have this type of language in here, but maybe I missed the 20th meeting, so maybe I misdiscussed that.
What page are you on?
So
124 of the agenda.
I think
123, 124.
the intent of the report is to establish potential funding sources. And it has been noted as a potential funding source. And in the previous meeting, Councillor Race requested further details on the actual funding plan. So the Integrated Flood Hazard Management Plan identifies a number of different funding sources, CACs being one of them. Staff will work to come back to council with a specific funding proposal, and that would be, I think, the best opportunity for council to say, if you're not supportive of CACs, then that would not form part of the final funding plan. But it has been identified as a potential funding source, and
By whom? By this report, and I'm saying that I don't think it should be a potential funding source in this report as well.
I think the intent is just that it's legislatively, it could be. It doesn't get into council preferences or opinions, so that's fair. If council doesn't support CACs being put towards flood protection upgrades, then it doesn't have to be. It's just been identified as one potential funding source.
Yeah.
So I would add to that, this is an engineering report that mentions here's a bunch of places that money could technically come from. We do have, I'm not sure if it's on an agenda for November yet or not, but we're working with the finance department for them to bring forward a discussion on where does council want to actually go, what direction do they want to go as far as securing a funding source for this.
I mean, would it be worthwhile in noting in the report that to date, we've not, the district has not considered CACs, has not used CACs for this kind of funding to date. I mean, reflecting on our, interim CAC policy, and we will have a new policy pretty soon, but I'm pretty sure that we hadn't contemplated that, other than I suppose it could fall under the general amenities, but even then, I mean, that's a pretty small proportion of what we have suggested, so lost my spot in terms of the list. So I have Councillor Kent, Councillor Pryor, and then Councillor Race.
If First off, thank you for this, because it's been a lengthy process to get here and a lot of work involved. I'm curious to see, I know you said there was a zero net loss as far as Squamish Nation lands will go in the IRs. So I'm curious to see how that will work out on a case-by-case basis. And the detail of that when you're able to break it down.
Councillor Bryan.
Yeah, on the CACs, I remember the conversation that we had, and at one time the province didn't allow CACs to go to diking, and then they changed the rules to allow it. I think that's what got us talking about it.
DCCs.
Or was it DCCs? Anyway, the CACs, we have to be careful with CACs going to diking, because I don't want to get in the trap that we got with our incentive package on the oceanfront and the CACs on the oceanfront. So as long as I don't really support CACs going to diking either. So.
And I'm also wondering, so it is still the case then to staff that diking and flood mitigation is still not eligible under the current DCC program?
That's correct.
So, I mean, who knows, maybe that is something that we might want to consider lobbying the province or, working on that. And I know the mayor has an opinion on that. I'll let her share that right now.
Well, yeah, it's been brought to UBCM a couple times and
History.
squashed every time by the members at UBCM because they see it as a download onto municipalities, and municipalities have enough infrastructure projects that DCC funds need to go to. So it's been done, we can keep doing it if that's actually what we want to use DCCs for. And that's the challenge, is that these are very expensive, and we got downloaded it 12 years ago, and anyway.
Okay. Councillor Cryer and Councillor Rees. You got yours? Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's, because I think the two have come out, so we're not talking DCCs, we can't use DCCs, so we're talking about CACs. And I can understand the report mentioning CACs because technically it is a possibility. I mean, that's just the reality of it. We would prefer, I think, and I think there's almost a consensus about that, probably not to use CACs. And I think the place to state that very clearly is in our CAC policy. And maybe have a hint of it here that it's certainly not a preferred option, or some kind of negative language, if you like. But I think we want to be clear in our CAC policy that absent extraordinary circumstances, we're not using them for. And that's the thing that I think should give notice to developers, not to kind of package their deal in that fashion. Because I tend to agree with everybody, we really don't want the absent extraordinary circumstances applying them towards the dike.
Yeah, I'm hearing general consensus on that, so we'll go to Mayor Heitzman and Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, just further up in the report on page 121, it says here the district will take a lead role in providing funding, but will need federal and provincial government assistance to implement many IFHMP recommendations. I'd almost like to flip that around and make the assumption that the federal and the provincial governments will be looking to them as the primary funder with our support. They should be paying 80% of it, we should be paying 20% of it. So I think we kind of need to flip that around.
Councillor Elliott.
And I think, just based on my colleagues' opinions, that just after CACs are discussed, so this is on page 8.8, why did they number them like that? Anyway.
Engineer.
It says flood protection was not considered in the district's 2015 interim community levy contribution targets and allocations. And that's looking backwards. So we should just say flood protection is not considered in the district's community levy contribution targets and allocations. And a change in policy would be required in order to include diking as part of that, just so that it's really clear that this isn't our first go-to place. And I'd be okay if we just made the language a little bit stronger there. Leave it in as something to be mentioned, but clear that we're not considering it.
All right. Any other comments or questions before we move along, we do still have one more item left.
Just a brief comment. As the report outlines, this is sort of one of the best, one of the most comprehensive flood hazard management plans in the province. So, I mean, it's been a long time. I think we're in our 4th year now, because I think it started at the very end of last term. So, look forward to actually adopting it, getting it out there. But generally, good work. It's been a long haul. Thank you.
Are you moving the staff recommendation?
Sure. With the comments as expressed.
Seconded by Councillor Chappelle. Any further discussion? Staff?
Can I just read back the comments, just to make sure we're on the same page? On page 121, flip the lead roll from municipal to federal and provincial, and then to generally soften the language around CAC, make it a little more negative. Specifically on page 8.8 is not considered in current policy, and a change in policy would be required, or to that effect. Those are the 2 major changes.
I think so, yeah.
Thank you.
All right. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next item, floodplain bylaw introduction. Slide should go in there.
All right, now that we have the IFHMP adopted, let's get right into the
No, we don't have
implementation.
it adopted. It's a committee meeting, just so you know. Nice one.
Nice try.
Okay, I'm still David Wilson.
I'm watching you, David.
Municipal engineer with the District of Squamish, and here to introduce the floodplain bylaw to council for feedback. This is scheduled to come back to council on October 17th for the first 3 readings. And so this is just a general introduction and for feedback. The governing legislation is in the Local Government Act. It allows local governments to designate land as floodplain, where it considers that the land could be subject to flooding. And if land is designated as a floodplain, the local government can then specify construction requirements, specifically in relation to flood construction levels and setbacks. The local government needs to consider and comply with any applicable provincial guidelines and regulations, and a local government can provide exemptions if it considers that they are consistent with provincial guidelines. So the floodplain bylaw, as I mentioned in the last report, is one of the key policy implementation pieces of the Integrated Flood Hazard Management Plan. And it will provide building elevations, setbacks, and construction specifications for new development within floodplains. So the floodplain bylaw does 4 main things. The first is it designates floodplains, which then gives the bylaw the ability to regulate development within those areas. It establishes flood construction levels and setbacks. And that can be from watercourses or from dikes. It establishes floodplain specifications, so things like erosion and scour protection for foundations. And it establishes exemptions, so there are 3 types of exemptions that I'll talk about on a later slide. The areas that have been designated as floodplains are areas that have been identified in the Integrated Flood Hazard Management Plan. Most of those areas have been mapped. So those are all floodplains, and then any coastal areas that are less than 5.6 meters elevation are also designated as floodplains. Onto flood construction levels. So flood construction levels apply to habitable areas, and habitable areas are residential, commercial, and areas where there's going to be storage of goods that could be damaged by floodwater. And so flood construction levels are determined by the higher of the following items. And for most developments, it's just going to be the flood elevations that have been determined by flood modeling in the Integrated Flood Hazard Management Plan. And those maps form an appendix to the bylaw. And as an aside, that information will also go onto our GIS website so that landowners and developers can go on there and see what flood construction levels are in different parts of town. For unique sites and this will apply on a site-specific basis. So for areas that are within overland flow areas, this is where shallow water could flow through an area like Garibaldi Estates or Valley Cliff, but where deep water wouldn't be expected. Flood construction levels would be determined by something called a minimum ponding elevation. That's determined by local topography, so site grades, elevation of roads, and so forth. For areas that are directly adjacent to a sea dike, they would need to be 0.3 meters or 1 foot above the sea dike, and that's to account for wave overtopping. For areas that are titled unconnected coastal flood areas, not sure what happened there. So the areas that would not be protected by the planned future sea dike, the flood construction level would be determined by a qualified professional. And for areas that are exposed to tsunami risk, they would need to meet the minimum tsunami run-up elevation of 4.7 meters. So the objectives of this policy is to keep habitable areas safe and dry. That will result in a safer and more resilient community, reduce damages after a flood, and a shorter recovery period following a flood as well. The next regulation is with respect to setbacks. So setbacks are from two main things. One is natural boundaries, and the other is from flood protection works. So setbacks are 30 meters from major rivers, 15 meters from the natural boundary of the ocean, 30 meters from any watercourse within an area that's designated as a secondary floodway, and 15 meters from any other watercourse. Setbacks from protective works is 7.5 meters from the toe of a dike, 3 meters from the toe of a future Squamish River dike or Mamquam River South dike, which is to a higher standard, so that's to a 1 in 500 year standard. So we've reduced the setback from the typical 7.5 meters. All development has to stay outside of existing right-of-ways. The setback from sea dikes is 15 meters from the waterside crest of the sea dike or 3 meters from any structural element of the sea dike, and also outside what's termed the theoretical dike section. We've provided some figures in the bylaw to make that very clear what we're talking about. And for float homes or any development on the water side of a dike, they would need to stay 7.5 meters from the water side toe of the dike. And so the objectives of these setbacks are to enhance community protection, to give the district the ability to maintain and upgrade dikes in the future, and also to preserve space for our floodways, and also to ensure that development is safe and resilient by reducing its hazard exposure. There are a number of specifications for new developments, so things like keeping major fixed equipment, furnaces, hot water tanks, major electrical equipment, that needs to go above the flood construction level, providing erosion and scour protection for foundations so that in the event of a flood, houses stay fixed and aren't damaged, and using flood-resistant materials below the flood construction level. We have an appendix in the bylaw that has a whole list of flood-resistant materials that was determined by FEMA following Hurricane Katrina. They went in and evaluated areas that were underwater for several weeks, and they saw which materials stood up and which didn't, and so this is based on that. And the objectives are, again, to ensure safe and resilient development and to shorten the recovery period following a flood. And the last thing that the bylaw does is it provides exemptions. So there's three main types of exemptions. The first is general exemption. So this applies to specific building types. Farms, garden sheds, that type of thing does not need to meet flood construction levels. Additions to a pre-existing and non-conforming structure that's less than 25% of the original non-conforming floor area. Specific areas of a building like garages and entryways that are below certain specified sizes, and then interior renovations. All of those do not need to meet flood construction levels. We're also maintaining the local area exemption in the downtown. This is in our current OCP, and it exempts non-residential uses from meeting the flood construction level in the downtown, and that's to preserve the historic streetscape and promote a vibrant downtown. And then finally, there are something titled site-specific exemptions. So this applies in cases of hardship. If there's a a hardship in meeting the flood construction level, if that can be proven and certified by a qualified professional, and they meet a set of minimum conditions, then the flood construction level can be reduced or waived. So there are a number of benefits that will result from having a floodplain bylaw. The first is it will save residents money. Right now, anyone who's applying for a building permit within the floodplain needs to hire a qualified professional to prepare a flood hazard assessment. So this floodplain bylaw will cover most building permit applications. If they just meet the requirements in the bylaw, they don't need to spend the $1,000 or $2,000 to hire a qualified professional and certify flood mitigation. It also ensures a consistent approach rather than the current approach, which is ad hoc and very site-specific. It will ensure safe and resilient development. We think the exemption policies that have built in also provide a reasonable degree of flexibility, and we think it will reduce review time because we won't need to be reviewing as many flood hazard assessment reports, and hopefully that means faster processing times for building permits. And with that, I will hand it back to the chair. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I have Councillor Pryor, Chappelle, and Mayor Heinzman.
Thank you. There's some lots right up at the north end of the, inlet there. And if they went 7-meter setback, they'd be out on the road. So what about minimum setbacks, exemptions for hardship?
I didn't hear the area that you were.
Right at the end of the Malcolm Inlet there.
The Malcolm
Right
Blanchard.
up near the railroad bridge?
Railroad Bridge. Okay, yes. So there are, I haven't gone into every detail. This is a fairly detailed bylaw.
I know people up there that have problems with that.
So there are some exemptions for setbacks from the CDEC. That is the CDEC in that area.
Yeah.
And so it does allow placing a fill within dike setbacks under certain conditions, ensuring that a qualified professional certifies it. So there is a little bit of flexibility built into that, but there are still minimum requirements. We need to make sure that we don't have buildings over top of an integral piece of the dike. And so, we're providing some flexibility, but we also want to make sure that we're not compromising.
Well, they were just talking to me about that just a little while ago.
Okay, Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you. How does this fit in with step code currently? And as far as using waterproof, the concern I have is using the waterproof material down below. Does that mean, so the full flood construction level would have to be concrete or other materials? Is it still wood?
Wood is allowed below the flood construction level. It is a fairly permissive list of flood-resistant materials. It includes plywood and a number of different, even drywall materials, but certain non-paper-faced gypsum board. So there's.
So it doesn't really change our.
I think it provides enough flexibility that people can still build elements below the flood construction level.
And the list of things that can't go below flood construction level, currently we allow electrical below. Does this change this?
So minor electrical can still go below. So for instance, garages need lights and electrical plugins. We're saying that major electrical switchgear, breakers, panels, that kind of thing should go up above.
So that's a change. That's a significant change in how we do things.
Yes, my understanding is that the building department has already been applying that policy as a practice, and so this would.
Inconsistently.
Mr. Buxton?
Yes, but I will give them the reason and manner to be consistent to solve that problem.
Yes, and I'm just thinking about smaller, I was just thinking about smaller homes, and that we, currently in other flood construction areas in the province, they allow toilets and other plumbing equipment in the downstairs, but don't allow electrical, and we were the opposite, we didn't allow trailers to allow electrical. So now we're changing it so that nothing is allowed downstairs in the flood construction level, except
So
for minor electrical.
we're allowing entryways and garages below a specific size. Crawl spaces are allowed below the flood construction level with a maximum ceiling height of 1.5 meters. We're basically complying with the provincial regulations. The provincial guidelines don't allow bathrooms, so if specific municipalities have allowed that, that would be done at the community level, but we're basically proposing an approach that's consistent with provincial regulations.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hi, one little specific question, then I wouldn't mind having you sort of run through a bit of a scenario so I understand how this could help a individual developer down the road.
Sure.
With regard to water pumps for well systems, I didn't see it as an excluded type of thing. Literally every water pump in Paradise Valley is under the flood construction level. Is this something we should include in the exemption?
We shouldn't need to because the flood construction level only applies to habitable areas. And so with a well pump being outside of habitable area, it's
So
just
it
not,
wouldn't affect it at all?
it's exempt from the bylaw.
Okay, great. So I'm just wondering if you could just, I'm trying to understand the maps and how they work, because they're not really done to contour, they're done to distance from the hazard. So I'm just trying to understand, if you could give me an example of, I don't know, go to a map and pick a spot in a certain colored gradient, and if a developer came in or a landowner came in and said, I want to build here, and normally they'd have to get their own geo whatever to do all this analysis, how will this now save them that step? Can you just run me through a scenario? I'm just trying to understand how it works.
Okay, so the current process would be, say if there's a house that's in Denville, and they want to build a home, then they would have to go and get a geotechnical or a civil engineer, and they would complete a flood hazard assessment. The geotechnical engineer needs to certify the development is safe for the intended use. They would specify the flood construction level, any other mitigation requirements. So that typically for a run-of-the-mill application can be $1,000 or $2,000. And now with this floodplain bylaw, they would come in and they would, if they meet the requirements of the bylaw, which they would look on our GIS site, determine what the flood construction level is. Our building department would also look at that to make sure that it's correct. As long as they meet that and the other requirements in the floodplain bylaw, there's no geotechnical engineer or certification that needs to be done. Essentially, the district is stepping in and fulfilling that role. We're saying this is what needs to be done in order to make sure the development is safe for the intended use, and there's no third party involved.
That's great. Glad we're saving people money.
That's what they say now.
Okay, Councillor Elliott and then Councillor Race.
Okay, I have a few questions. I also have a scenario. There is 8.2, which is exempts a person from meeting the floodplain setback in relation to a setback from an existing dike that does not meet provincial standards. Can you give me an example of where this might apply? I'm just trying to understand this particular exemption.
Okay, so the coastal flood mitigation strategy identifies the sea dike along a 7-kilometer perimeter, and take for instance somewhere in the CN Rail Park. The sea dike is proposed to follow a government road in that area. Right now that dike has not been built, and so the intent of this policy is to say if the dike hasn't been built, we still want to ensure that there's a setback. And so that's what this does. It says in the absence of a dike being there, but where we have identified that one needs to be, we would establish that setback.
Okay, and that would be up to.
And so, yeah, and so specifically what we're saying is that they would need to get a qualified professional to come up with a design section and determine, okay, this is the footprint of the dike that we need here, and buildings need to be set back X distance from that.
I have 2 typos which I can give you.
Okay.
On a couple of the maps, that are attached to this bylaw. So the lower Squamish River and then say versus Valley Cliff. One of them provides flood construction levels with freeboard and the other one doesn't. I'm trying to understand why we with that distinction.
Okay, so that was a very conscious decision that's been made. And the reason why is because we've done different types of flood modeling, and in the Squamish River and Mamquam River floodplain, we've done what's called two-dimensional modeling. That's where they determine dike breach scenarios. They have to make a whole bunch of assumptions. And so within the Squamish and Mamquam River floodplain, we've looked ahead to what we anticipate being year 2100 conditions. So infill happening, floodproofing fill going in. Basically a number of conservative assumptions have been made, and so that means the flood construction levels have gone up higher than probably what is today's condition. And so because of those conservative assumptions, we said it's not appropriate to put another freeboard on top of that. We said basically those conservative assumptions are the freeboard. And so typically a flood construction level includes 0.6 meters freeboard. We said because of those conservative assumptions, we're not going to put that in, especially because in some areas flood construction levels are already quite high and challenging to meet. So we thought that was still provides a good degree of safety, but is a little bit more reasonable.
Okay, can I ask one more question? So this bylaw will apply from sort of this point forward. So any phase development agreements, that sort of thing, they don't change just because this bylaw goes in terms of what they promised to build, like CWC.
That is a good question. I would probably defer to Jonas or Mr. Bunce.
The PDA will be unchanged. This will not retroactively apply through the PDA. The PDA will sit in precedence to this.
In precedence, okay. But going forward, this would apply to all future large developments.
Correct. But I think with respect to the Peninsula Newport, that there's nothing between the two that is inconsistent.
They are consistent, yeah.
So it's not going to create an inconsistency.
Thank you. Mr. Reese.
Thank you. And just to the mayor's point about, and your comment about doing away with the geotech reports, bear with me because it's been a while since I've looked at them, but two things that they say in addition to what you said was I think they had a community charter requirement that the lands can be used safely. And the word safely was magic. That came from section 51, I think, if I remember correctly. And the other is...
You're just showing off.
I know, sorry, I had to drop that in there. Well, I spent a lot of time with that one. Anyway, so that was one thing, is that yes, it can be used safely. And secondly, they also typically had what forms of mitigation were acceptable, and they weren't consistent. I mean, it was never, from my reading, a one-size-fits-all in different areas, and it partly depended on the potential speed of the flow and how much armoring was required, whether it could be concrete, wood, built-up dirt, if it was built-up dirt, how you armored it to stop that, and so forth. So is there something in this now that replaces those two things?
Yes, through the chair. So the community charter and the land title act, I believe it is, are, so the community charter applies to building permits. The land title, I believe, applies to subdivision. It says that a building inspector or an approving officer can require a geotech, a QP report in cases where they consider the lands may be subject to flooding. And the local government doesn't have a bylaw. So previously we didn't have that bylaw, and now that we do, now the building inspector and the approving officer would not need to commission that report. But I do want to clarify, so the building permit should cover 90 or 95% cases of the building permits, run-of-the-mill stuff. There still will be unique scenarios, so particularly high hazardous areas where, so say for instance, the flood velocity is greater than 2.8 meters a second. That would require a qualified professional to come up with a site-specific design. Our official community plan also would still require flood hazard assessments for subdivision and for rezoning. So this really applies specifically to building permits. There still will be cases where we do require those reports. It's just going to really reduce the number that are required.
And there are details around scour protection, different velocities and everything within the bylaws, so it doesn't have to be a bespoke per property design.
That's right.
So another question, in 8.5, this is about the design of erosion protection, that people can design their own. And then it says where the district accepts the revised design. In all the other places, we've mentioned that it's the general manager of community planning. And I was just wondering whether we need to be more clear about who accepts and how what they base that decision on.
That is a good point. I should adjust that. I will adjust that as part of the bringing it forward for readings. It should be identified as a specific person who is accepting that.
All right, council, any other comments or feedback? Recognizing that we're going to have future opportunities to do this comes before us in a regular council meeting. Do you guys need do you have any other questions or information that you need from us?
Just looking for general feedbacks.
Okay, fantastic. All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, can I ask a quick question before David goes about the integrated? It's just been sort of in my brain. I'm trying to really understand exactly what the Squamish Nation comments are with regard to no net loss of land. I'm just trying to understand that.
I think what the Squamish Nation are saying is that if the dike needed to expand on reserve land, that they would be seeking some kind of compensation in terms of some other land to offset that loss. So if they...
And they're looking to whom to offset that land loss?
That's not specified, but typically that would be the provincial or federal government.
Okay. But it doesn't necessarily mean, and I don't want to alarm anyone, I'm just trying to think of theoretical scenarios in my brain, but if the dike was actually realigned someday in the future and a portion of it was no longer technically protected, is that what they're talking about too? Like no net loss of protected land, or is it just no net loss of land?
I think what they were talking about was no net loss of land because of expansions of the diking system, but I really shouldn't speak for them. They may
yeah, I'm just trying to clarify exactly what their intention is. Okay, thanks.
So just a bit further to that, so
Sorry.
opened up that can of worms. So if there was to be zero net loss, for instance, if there was something to encroach onto their land that would nullify that or sterilize it, was there the consideration to go to the water side at all? I mean, I know it's a case-by-case basis, obviously, but would that be an option as well? To keep that from being a net loss?
It is an option. It's something that can be considered. There's technical considerations that need to be involved. And also often the reserve land is on both sides of the dike, so even expanding on the water side of the dike could technically be considered a loss as well.
Yeah.
So those are detailed considerations.
Yeah, sure. Just curious, thanks.
Okay, I think we're ready to set you free.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving along in the agenda, I know that Mayor wanted to table something, the roundtable discussion.
Yeah, two things that came up in the Business Rising for the minute. Have to chat about it now, and one sort of stems from something that was on the radio as I was driving in, was the electric vehicle charging, and not necessarily specifically related to the proposal that was in front of us. But one of the comments I heard on the radio was someone tried to get an electric vehicle, and their strata said, we don't have enough power to put in a DC fast charge or supercharge. And maybe through to staff, just wondering, where are we with some direction or policy when we have large, either townhome or stacked townhome or stratas come in and in providing for a certain amount of electric vehicle charging, as well as making sure they're planning for the future in terms of being able to provide enough power so people can actually, and just, how are we integrating that? Where would we integrate that into our policy?
Through the chair, I believe it's part of the zoning bylaw amendments that we discussed last week and that are coming.
I just wanted to make sure that it was actually included, and I just couldn't remember.
I'm almost certain that the new zoning bylaw is going to have a requirement that multifamily development have a percentage of their stalls, percentage to be determined, as electrical charging vehicle stations.
And so that as part of that, it would, into it, that you would have to have X amount of power to the building. You have to make sure you can.
Well, I think by definition, they need to.
Okay, I just want to make sure that that's
okay.
really clearly articulated in
Yeah,
there.
and it would also be interesting too to learn whether or not the province and BC Hydro are working on any kind of program for retrofitting some of the existing.
So, and we have talked about that before. There is a there is a retro, for multi-family, I can't remember the name of the program, but I made staff aware of it. FBC, Fraser Basin Council, manages the monies. So, and I know we're trying to make all of our stratas aware of this opportunity. I'm hoping either Dora or somebody's working on that because it was brought up a couple of months ago, but there's a program out there already. So one other thing with regard to the...
Mayor Heisman, Councilor
Oh,
Pryor
I'm
has
sorry.
something specifically on that.
Thanks. You know, that's an excellent point. It's been one of those things that's been bugging me. I'm putting in an electric charging thing in my carport, because I'm gonna get an electric car. So 32 amps. I mean, that's no little plug-in to scoff at. So, you know, we've got 250 units going along the waterfront, 110 units north of the brew pub, and I can just go around town right now. And if we say we want 20% powered up for our plugins, that's substantial costs to a development to have that extra power brought in. So, you know, it has to be clear. It has to be clearer than what we're putting out there now to make sure the power's there. You know, it's a 32 amps. In other words, a 30 amp breaker is not going to cut it. You got to have a 40 amp breaker. That's the same as your clothes dryer. So I think that that's an excellent point, and whatever we need to do to make that clear and make sure people are bringing in the power, because what's going to happen is it'll be like, oh, we need some power, and it's like, wow, we don't have the power. Now what are we going to do?
Yeah, one more, and just to add to the Cleveland Height discussion, I've had some conversations with a few people about what they do in the city of Vancouver, I think particularly with heritage buildings and how do you preserve that. And just maybe have staff look into it a little bit. They have almost like a density bank. So if you're trying to preserve lower buildings here, and I'm going to explain this wrong, but maybe my point is that staff needs to come back with a more comprehensive. But essentially, if we decide we want to keep Cleveland Avenue in that sort of 1 or 2 block section lower, we can create a density bank or a Cleveland Avenue bank where those landowners get to essentially sell the extra density. They have these programs in Gastown and some other areas in Vancouver. I'm not explaining it very well, but essentially if, so we're not necessarily diminishing the land value or the value of on Cleveland, we're allowing them to essentially sell that density to someone else, and they might be able to go up somewhere else. So I just thought it was kind of an interesting idea of how do we change, maybe if we want to achieve that Cleveland Avenue vernacular of sort of lower and build up on the streets on either side, then it's kind of a creative way of figuring out how to do that. I'm not sure if staff's familiar with what they've done in Gastown and stuff.
It's a transfer of development rights scheme.
Essentially,
Yeah. We'll take a look at it and we'll see what
Councilor Race on that issue?
On that issue, the classic example is the corner of Burrard and Georgia, the northeast corner where the church is, I forget which church. But they sold, it's called an air parcel.
Exactly.
They sold their air parcel to the high-rise next door to allow them to go up, and I can't remember how many stories they got, but it hit the media at the time. So that's exactly as the general manager says, transfer of development rights. In this case, it was to immediately adjacent, and so I guess the question is, how far away can you transfer them? And they make up, that's a negotiation, of course, we don't get involved in that, but that's a negotiation between two different parcels of land or the owners. But then it's possible, and we covenant the first one so it doesn't go any higher, and it would be some kind of a heritage building. The second one is given whatever it is.
Exactly. It just hasn't been part of the conversation, so I thought it was worth evaluating. And what's that? Did you? Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't see it in the last presentation we did not.
Okay, so I have Councillor Elliott, Councillor Chappelle on this.
No.
Oh, Councillor Pryor.
Oh, Ted.
No, we're just trying to keep the thread of the
Understand.
conversation going on a specific issue. It's on this issue, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think when we brought the bylaw or the proposals forward, the last time we discussed it, I asked this question. And you said you had, I think, looked at Gastown and that in some respects it had not worked because some things have sat very dormant and not been developed. So
Yes, it takes two to tango, basically. You're looking to make a match between the two property owners, so there's that alignment that needs to happen. But we were, the scheme we were working on now was essentially giving two treatments to Cleveland, one for smaller lots and one for bigger lots. We could look at take another look at the development rights transfer as an option to the scheme that we're working on as well. So we just widen the array of options available to those properties. But it is a fairly complex system to administer.
Yeah. And it would be interesting to know whether there's, where that density could land, like where are the available areas, just to ensure that there would actually be a market for it. But I'll have Councillor Chappelle on this, and then Councillor Pryor.
Thanks, and that's my point, is that you have to have a large amount of land to be able to bank land, and we have no land. We do trading density on Cleveland Avenue. You could, and we already have density, like, we're not talking about, when you're talking about 4 to 6 floors, that's not a lot of density, and you add flood construction level on top of that, if you're looking at residential buildings or parking. And our land base just doesn't support that. It's not something that's possible. So we already have basically, we don't know exactly, most of our land's been built up already. We have this small section of Cleveland Avenue that is, I don't know what we consider it. I think it's worth having a conversation about whether it's quaint or whether it's inefficient and old and in need of taking down. So the density on that, in order to rebuild that, you're gonna have to go up at least 4 floors to make it even commercially viable with parking. So the one conversation we haven't had around that is what you do with the parking. Do you give leniency for parking? And that, again, should come with the parking strategy. So I think this requires a whole line item in the community development agenda to actually discuss possibilities and what our actual land bank options would be. Just thinking about, we've got 6 floors going on 2nd Avenue. We've got 6 floors going on Loggers Lane. And then we're gonna have this one little inefficiently built area of land use that's actually energy inefficient, built with old wiring, is actually a bit of a hazard. So I'm really, not allowing renewal in that area is going to.
Well, I'll jump in on that, and I think the intention would be that there could still be redevelopment, but the idea would be that the redevelopment would happen and it would be at a shorter height than it otherwise would have been. And I wonder if maybe a suggestion to sort of rein it in is maybe we could just take a look at our existing C4 zoning areas and see, what is the capacity we have? Like, let's say we're willing to add, 1 or 2 floors onto the existing zoning. What is the sort of total square footage, and does that look reasonable from a pro forma. I don't even know with all the, you know, parking and all of that, so I'm gonna let Mayor Heinzman jump in because she
Yeah.
is the one who.
Yeah, no, and I didn't necessarily, we weren't prepared to have a conversation and hit all the points that councillors have made, and that wasn't my intention. And I apologize for not remembering the specific conversation about the last meeting. I just thought it was worth adding to the analysis of, and I'm not saying 2 stories or 4 stories or 3 stories, I'm saying adding that possibility to the analysis of how, once we determine what our intentions are on Cleveland, to get there if that's what it takes. So I just wanted to bring it back so that we are considering that possibility as we go further along. I didn't think this was the time to actually re-debate the whole thing.
Staff.
Thank you. So we did have a lengthy discussion last time around when we talked about Cleveland, and I believe the scheme that we came up with was regulating through the lot size, so that those smaller lots can only be, or the smallest lots can only be consolidated once into a small lot, and that would really dictate the height because there's only so much parking you can put, and it's unlikely that anybody could squeeze more than 4 stories out of that, you know, constraint.
Thank you for that reminder. I know I wasn't present at that meeting, so that's very helpful. Okay, Councillor Chappelle on a different issue?
Yes.
Oh, Councillor Pryor on that one. You're sitting too close.
Yeah, great topic. I do think we should contemplate where the 12 stories are gonna go, which parcels in town are the towers gonna go when they come.
Or if.
Yeah, well, I think of the Lord Go Mall, the entrance into town, that's big enough. Anyway, and possibly there might be a opportunity there. Also in height, and we're contemplating 6 stories and 8 stories now. Someone told me that when you go higher than normal in the city, you have to hire extraordinarily highly qualified architects to design something because everyone's going to see it. Fabulous. You can't just come in with a status quo building, and that's something I think we should look at sooner than later because we are visiting higher buildings. We've got some higher buildings coming to us, and so let's make sure we get fabulous designs on it.
And yeah, I would imagine that at rezoning stage 2, the applicants are aware of the taste of also. I'm thinking, you know, some recent ones where that played a role for sure. Okay, Councillor.
Thanks. I was approached by some business owners in the business park that were asking about employee housing, and all of them are in the exact same crux that us downtown are, but they have space to be able to build, and they were asking about being able to build apartments or living spaces on their units, or be able to house people on their lots. And I thought that was a worthwhile conversation to have, is that some of these, they absolutely can't find employee housing, and they're having trouble bringing up employees because of that, and thought, you know, if we could throw 2 apartments on our space, that would be something that they would really be interested in doing. So I think that's a worthwhile conversation to have, is that if there's some sort of restrictive employee housing, I'm not sure what the policy would look like for that, but having employee housing attached. And I know that this is already happening, is that people are already living in their industrial lots or in their I-1 lots in the business park. I'd like to make that safe and actually appropriate, so I think that conversation should be had.
Okay, and I don't know if staff knows this off the top of their heads, but is there not a provision within the business park for very limited residential use? And could you explain?
Yes, there is a provision for caretakers who essentially are an accessory dwelling unit per lot.
One unit.
One unit per lot.
And do we know what the size, is there a max size?
Yeah, they're usually restricted to, it's either 90 or 70 square meters. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Okay. Well, that's something we can certainly consider for a future agenda item. And I have Councillor Pryor.
Yeah. I lost what I was thinking about there.
Well, you can always bring it up to the chair after.
Yeah, let me know.
Future
We
agenda.
can get it on there. But yeah, employee housing. Let's see, very big. Anything else that anybody else wants to raise? Okay, motion to terminate, moved by Mayor Heisman, seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everybody.